This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
Good morning, it's 3 minutes after 10 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, for which, as always, I thank you. Strange day this, or at least a strange story. You may be aware of some fairly epic scandals that have unfolded in the last few days on the political front. Forgive me if I am now bringing these to your attention for the first time. You may need to sit down and perhaps moderate your breathing or consult your GP about your blood pressure, because there are two stories bouncing about that are, they're up there with Watergate for me, or that time that Boris Johnson and Jacob Rees-Mogg tried to rip up the rule book of parliamentary standards after their mate Owen Paterson got busted for breaking the rules. And these are massive scandals. And if you're unaware of them, apologies for ruining your Monday. Keir Starmer moved a picture in Downing Street and Angela Rayner was filmed dancing while on holiday. Absolutely huge tales that perhaps give some indication of, if we were to be serious for a moment, why right-wing media is going through a period of absolutely hilarious discombobulation, trying to pretend that those stories are important when they are patently not. But here's a story involving a Labour MP, which, to my eyes, is a very, very big deal and a very, very big problem for Keir Starmer. And yet, for reasons that we may explore, it doesn't appear to be attracting anything like the negative attention that has been directed at Keir Starmer for moving a painting or Angela Rayner for daring to dance in public. Now, I know that they are the leader, respectively, and deputy leader of the Labour Party, and therefore, by definition, better or bigger stories. But it doesn't matter, really, if a Labour MP is on the hook for, to my eye, atrocious conduct. You can use him as a weapon with which to hit the leader and the deputy leader of the Labour Party. So two thoughts occur to me. The first is, perhaps, that there's something going on I'm missing. I've confessed to you on many occasions my absolutely atrocious news sense, the way that my antennae tend to twitch entirely inappropriate moments, and sometimes a story I think deserves a heck of a lot more coverage for perfectly reasonable reasons doesn't actually. I am, in other words, just wrong. And vice versa, stories that I don't think are a very big deal at all are actually desperately important, although I'm fairly confident that Keir Starmer moving a painting and Angela Rayner doing some dancing are not big stories. So either this is yet another example of my news antennae twitching inappropriately, or there are some interesting reasons why the kind of people pretending to be very exercised by Keir Starmer moving a painting or Angela Rayner doing some dancing are not really going in hard on this story. That might be an element of our conversation. Why wouldn't they get worked up about this? Because I think it's really, really bad. Jas Athwal is the newly installed MP for Ilford South. I don't like binary politics. I don't like the way that the two extremes to the left and the right can often appear to be more similar to each other when it comes to intolerance and unpleasantness than they are to everybody that sits between the two positions. So I don't like lazy, quasi-ideological posturing. But when I read this sentence, I did find myself wondering whether it was entirely compatible with what I would loosely describe as Labour values. The MP for Ilford South owns 15 properties, making him the biggest landlord in the House of Commons. That's not the scandal, let me be clear. But it is perhaps a first cause for pause. Should a Labour MP be a landlord on at all, let alone on that sort of scale? I can just about see a case for having one or two properties. If, for example, you moved out of the marital home, or becoming an MP means you've moved house, you've got a place in the constituency, or you've rented out the... I can just about see how, if it has become a sort of circumstantial property scenario as opposed to a business model. But I don't know, how naive do I sound when I say to you, I wonder if this breaks down on left and right. So oddly, if you're right-wing, you want to defend the Labour MP, you're going to have to come up with some sort of bogus allegation of hypocrisy in order to attack him. But I don't think a Labour MP should have 15 rental properties. I suppose you could begin to make a case for a Labour MP having 15 rental properties if he was a model landlord, if he was an absolute paragon of landlord virtue and could therefore be used as an exemplar with which to criticise landlords who do not prioritise their tenants, who do not look after their properties, who do not tick every box, dot every I, cross every T, and offer up a model of landlording to which all other landlorders can then be compelled to aspire. But he sure ain't that, folks. Oh, no. It's a brilliant piece of journalism, actually, by the BBC, by a journalist specifically I should single out for praise, called Joe Pike, because eagle-eared listeners may remember when Joe was working here at LBC, and we marked him out at the time as a young man who was clearly going places. And this is a brilliant piece of journalism because he refused to let go. He established first that a Labour MP, who is the biggest landlord in the House of Commons, was renting out flats in an absolutely unacceptable state. I mean, to name but a few of the scenarios from which he was profiting, there were flats where the fire alarms were hanging off the ceilings. There was a washing machine dumped next to a set of stairs. Most importantly, I think, there are several instances, in fact, in a block of 7, he owns the whole block. Half the tenants claimed they had to regularly clean their bathroom ceilings to remove mould. Now, I am a bit of a bore when it comes to mould. There are 2 things that I think are going to be defining health stories of the next decades, next few decades. One is the relationship between your gut flora and your mental health, which I happen to believe is an absolute Mount Everest of science and information. I honestly, and the more I read about it, the more I research it, the more interesting it gets. But I can't come on the radio every morning and start talking about your gut flora and your mental health because it's not that sort of program. But that is just for the record, that is something that I think is going to turn out to be an absolutely epic medical issue, and it is already becoming one. The other is the impact that mold can have on people. I think this is again a very reported and misunderstood phenomenon. But if someone tells me, for example, that they have a child who has suddenly started displaying symptoms that might appear to be more like mental health symptoms than physical health symptoms, the first question I will ask them is if they've recently had a flood or if they have mold in their house. Various reasons and experiences for me to have arrived at this conclusion. But I think that's another area of science, of medical science, that is going to explode in the coming years. But it hasn't exploded yet, so you cannot use it. But what it might turn out to be is a stick with which to beat Jas Athwal for being the landlord of properties that are riddled with black mould. But you shouldn't be renting out properties that are riddled with black mold. So the story's moved through various stages, beginning with the mold, the infestations, the dirty communal areas, the lights that did not work. And we began with a denial. It was essentially denied by the MP that he was presiding over this kind of property, if you could call it an empire. Originally, when approached by the BBC, his agent said, "I have no statement at this time." But Athwal was essentially denying responsibility for what had gone on. Then, as Joe Pike continued to dig, the MP released a statement describing himself as furious about the appalling state of the flats he owns. And I think language is important here because the statement or one report says Mr. Athwal has described himself as furious after the appalling state of flats he rents out in East London was revealed. And I sort of thought, well, I prefer the phrase owns or profits from. Rents out sounds a bit anodyne, don't you think? He said to be furious about the state of the flats he owns or the state of the flats he rents to people much poorer than him for money, for profit. But again, I'm worried that I'm sounding like a communist. What's wrong with being a landlord? In and of itself, nothing. But is it compatible with Labour values? I don't know. I don't think it is. I've got to be honest with you. Not 15 flats. And then we come to what, for me, well, there are 2 elements of the story that, to me, are much bigger issues than anybody else seems to think. And by that, oddly, I mean the members of my profession who are normally queuing up to attack Labour politicians for saying boo to a goose. The first bit is that when he was the leader of Redbridge Council, he introduced legislation that required landlords to have licenses that would, I think, have involved the properties being checked for precisely the sort of problems that they had. And despite being the one who introduced the rules, he wasn't obeying them. So he didn't have the correct property licenses that were required under a scheme he introduced as Redbridge Council leader. And he claimed originally that he had. So again, how much of an excuse can it be to say, as he has done, it was all my agent's fault? And that is the statement. I'm shocked and sickened by the series of problems that have come to light, and I am unreservedly sorry to all my tenants for the bad experience they have endured. I will be reimbursing every tenant that is out of pocket for repairs or renewals they have had to undertake. I will be issuing each tenant with a personal apology and meeting with them urgently. Now, I'm a bit cynical sometimes. And I don't like being cynical. I'm not going to pretend that I do. It sometimes comes very naturally to me, but I don't like being cynical. And my first reaction on reading that was, gosh, what a refreshingly unequivocal apology that is. I know you're probably laughing at me now, aren't you? Oh, James, I've got a bridge I want to sell you. What a refreshingly unequivocal apology that is. After 14 years of politicians being caught doing things they shouldn't have been doing and either completely ignoring the story or signing up their cheerleaders to pretend that they'd done nothing wrong, or indeed trying to pass legislation in the House of Commons to change the rules that they'd actually broken, I was briefly uplifted by the idea, or by the simple and unequivocal nature of this apology. Shocked and sickened, series of problems, unreservedly sorry, reimbursing everybody, and issuing each tenant with a personal apology and meeting with them urgently. So that's nice. And then, is it the voice of cynicism that kicks in then and says, oh, he's a bit worried, isn't he? He's moving heaven and earth to make sure he hangs on to his job. So again, I don't know. And I realised, to my embarrassment, that I've probably spent the last few years setting up my approach to stories involving political malfeasance by seeing what the cheerleaders were doing and then being fairly confident that all we have to do as voices of honesty and integrity, all we have to do is do the opposite. You know, so if they try to change the rules in order to protect their friend who's broken the rules, we favour the rules. If, you know, a Prime Minister lies to the House of Commons, we remind everybody how important it is not to lie to the House of Commons. If a sitting MP goes off to eat ostrich anuses in the jungle without permission from her whips, we point out that she should never really be allowed anywhere near high office again. It's been pretty straightforward. So I think this is a really big deal. I think this is appalling, absolutely appalling for an MP of any party, but particularly for a Labour MP, to be close to a slum landlord, it seems to me, because the complaints from his tenants went unheeded. When he's caught, he denies it. When he's presented with evidence he can no longer deny, he backtracks and apologises and blames it entirely upon his agent, who he appointed. So I'm pretty sure this is a really bad story. But why am I, as a loosely left-wing journalist, more upset and excited about it than all of the people that are pretending to be enraged and infuriated about Keir Starmer moving a painting or Angela Rayner doing some dancing? I don't know. 0345 6060973 is the number that you need. I want you to tell me what you think of this story. How big a hole has Jas Athwal dug for himself with this story? Is it in any way defensible that you can own 15 properties, most of which appear to be in various states of disrepair and disgrace? Is it acceptable to blame your management agency, who he said he will be replacing within 48 hours? It's a little bit shaggy, isn't it? It wasn't me. You own the flats, mate. And you employ the agent, mate. And your tenants are living in relative squalor. You also introduced a licence scheme as leader of Redbridge Council that your own properties are not compliant with. Again, is that the biggest element of the story? What is it you do? I'm leader of Redbridge Council. What's your greatest achievement? I've introduced landlord property licences. Are you a landlord? Yes. Have you checked that all your properties are compliant with the licences that you're introducing? No. So that's, for me, an issue of incompetence as opposed to an issue of morality. I don't know that there's an issue of legality yet. Perhaps there will turn out to be, because I don't think this story is going away. But I think there is there's an immoral element to this story. I hold landlords who expect their tenants to continue paying their rent while living in circumstances that they wouldn't tolerate themselves in the lowest regard. I think there's a competence element to this story. How on earth can you introduce legislation as leader of the council that your own properties don't comply with? And I think there's a political element to this story as well, which is, and this might be naive, if you're a Labour politician, isn't it worse that you're a dodgy landlord than it would be if you were, or is that my biases coming in? Like, I expect right-wing people to exploit the poor. Not all of you, but I kind of expect this kind of behaviour from a Tory. I'd be much less shocked. So is it fair? That might be a nice place to start, actually. Is it fair to be more shocked by a Labour MP behaving in this manner than I would be by a Tory MP? And then, of course, the other question is, what's it like to live in a flat that is close to inhabitable, but when you try and complain, what's it like to try and get a response from an agent or a landlord when the flat or the home that you're living in is not fit for purpose? Should we get the phone lines open? So really, in a way, it's a long introduction, that, but you're used to it by now. In a way, I've given you all of the details of a story I think is both fascinating and more important than much of the media is currently allowing. It may be because it's a BBC story. Sometimes right-wing newspapers don't like to give the BBC the credit for having done some quality journalism, but I don't think it's that on this one. There's all the details there, and I suppose in a way I'm just saying, what do you think of this one? Because I think it stinks. I think it absolutely stinks. And I think if I was Keir Starmer, I would have said something about it by now. I don't know. Is it a whip removal issue, or does that sound like an overreaction? Labour MP, 15 properties, mould on the ceilings, fire alarms dangling from the wall, tenants having their calls go unanswered. Oh, it's all the agent's fault. I don't know. Find out what you think about this story after this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
23 minutes after 10 is the time. A Labour MP. I don't know. There's two conversations here. There's one about what he's done, the rights and wrongs of that, which is a little bit more straightforward, I think, because it's obvious he's done wrong. You can't have properties that are unfit for purpose and then just blame it all on your agent and hope it all goes away. But is there anything wrong in a Labour MP owning 15 properties and being the largest landlord in the House of Commons? I genuinely don't know. So I'm interested in your answers to both of these questions, which means I should start asking you what those answers are, doesn't it? Hillary's in, how do I say that? Rose Marquee.
Oh, hi. Yeah, no, it's not Hillary, it's Gillian.
It's Gillian, is it? Well, how did we get Hillary then, do we think?
I'm not sure.
And where are you calling from, Gillian, not Hillary?
Yes, Rose Marquee.
Rose Marquee, okay. Right, well, what made you pick up the phone? Can we... Gillian, thank you. Carry on.
That's all right, no problem, James. Hi. Yes, I'm a landlord myself, and once again, I'm just so sick of landlords not doing the right thing, and I really don't know how they get away with it. I really don't. It's just... I do. I do. The tenants live in fear. They're frightened of complaining in case they get turfed out. Tony in Southend can tell you a lot of people are too frightened to report things because it could upset the landlord and they get evicted. So that is really how they get away with it. Well, I think in Scotland we've got the no fault eviction. So I think Scotland's slightly different.
Well, in Redbridge, they had special licences introduced that all landlords had to have. It was introduced by the leader of the council, a bloke called Jas Athwal, who's now an MP, and been found not to have the licences that were part of his... Does it? What about the politics of it? Do I sound a little bit undergraduate when I say I'd expect it from a Tory, but I don't expect it from Labour?
Yeah, I think. I mean, I would expect better from a Labour MP myself, to be honest.
And do you employ an agent to look after your properties?
I do so employ agents.
If the agent was behaving badly, if the agent was taking their percentage on your properties every month, and either not dealing with or perhaps even ignoring the complaints of the tenants. Genuine question this, actually. I may even force you into percentages and numbers. How much of that would be your responsibility? Because you've deployed...
Well, in Scotland, it's 100% the landlord's responsibility.
Then why employ an agent then?
Well, because I don't want a phone call at 1 o'clock in the morning saying my washing machine's leaking.
No.
That's the agent.
But you pay the agent. You pay, so it's not, you pay the agent to take the phone call saying the washing machine's leaking. And if the agent takes your money and ignores your tenant, I think I could construct an argument to say that that's not your fault.
Well, under the law in Scotland...
Stop telling me about the law in Scotland. I'm talking about moral responsibility. Is that, how can, I mean...
Well, of course.
And how do you find out?
I would be furious.
How do you find out? How do you find out?
Well, obviously, a BBC reporter does his
I'm being serious. How would you find out if the tenant was complaining and the agent was either ignoring it or not dealing with it, or even bullying the tenant? How would you ever know?
Well, also in Scotland, the landlord has to register with the local council. And you've got to make sure.
That's true in Redbridge as well. We've already covered that one. But I mean, the question there of. I mean, it's interesting to hear a landlord answering some of these questions. A tenant, could you honestly argue? I think you could. It's the agents. This is what the MP's trying to do. Oddly, Gillian's contribution has made me wonder whether the MP does have a leg to stand on. I pay an agent to do this, and they haven't done it. In what other circumstances do you pay somebody to do something, and when they don't do it, it's your fault? I don't know. I told you there's a lot to talk about. Gillian, take care. Ali's in Bristol. Ali, what do you think?
Oh, hiya.
Hello.
I'm coming from the perspective of working within the industry you're discussing.
Yes.
I have to say, I've not done it myself. I've taken lots of properties on from maybe failed agents.
Okay.
Where nobody has known of any of the issues. And I'm talking about the landlord, because they are completely neglected by agencies, big or small.
So this is because it costs money to fix things, or it costs time?
No, just because it's probably a slack agent that isn't reporting stuff and doesn't want the hassle.
And the tenant has so little recourse. It may be slightly different in Scotland, but the tenant, if I phone my agent and say there's mould on my ceiling, or there's ants, there's a rat in my kitchen, what am I going to do? Or and you as the tenant just ignore me. I beg your pardon, as the agent, you just ignore me. I as the tenant, I've got nowhere else to go as the tenant.
I mean, you would, I guess, at that point always go to the council, ironically, in this situation. I appreciate that. Or you could probably go to Citizens Advice or housing, a housing association or charity.
Yeah, but you're swimming in treacle already, aren't you?
Exactly.
We all know that these are...
I genuinely do believe, I'm not saying it's the case for this person, but there is an argument that these processes can happen without any knowledge. I mean, if I was him now, what I would be doing is housing those poor, unfortunate tenants somewhere nice and getting a complete refit and making it look as if willing, but I really am not letting him off the hook at all, because if it transpires that he knew about it, fine.
I'm trying to have a sensible conversation. So it is feasible, because he trusted his agents that he didn't know any of this.
Yeah, I can assure you, for 15 years I've worked in this industry in Bristol, which is a really busy housing market.
Yes.
And with lots of big companies, and I really have taken houses away from other agencies where landlords have had absolutely no idea what has gone on.
And they've been dismayed to find out the state of it.
Completely.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, completely. And especially during COVID and things like that, where nobody bothered with anybody, nobody bothered with sort of inspections or anything like that.
Okay.
Yes. It's tricky.
It is tricky. Can I ask you a slightly leading question? Would you mind?
Go on then.
Given how little recourse tenants have in the circumstances that we're discussing today, why would any landlord not want to exploit the situation to the maximum profit and minimum outlay?
Oh, well, that is a slightly depressing question.
Yeah.
And I mean, to be honest, down here, it's if you're talking about things like council licensing, which is massive in Bristol, the council genuinely don't know unless you register.
Right.
The irony is, the good landlords,
will
like
register.
that I work with,
Yes.
all register. But if you don't, there are still gaps in the market to be
exploited, and then people will see an opportunity to make money out of people who are vulnerable, but I'm vulnerable by definition because, as we've established, they haven't got many places to go. Before you go, do I sound silly to you when I say that I would expect better from a Labour MP in this field? Does that all sound a bit undergraduate to you? No,
I mean, I'm depressed
Yes.
about it, to be honest. They should have an eye on the ball, and I have to say, any landlord should look after their property and their tenants. It makes for a much happier and better all-round, holistic approach to housing.
And he has, he has done that in the past. He has cast himself as a renter's champion, describing himself as someone who lets the homes below the market rate in order to help people, and addressing the licences issue. He has said specifically, it was my understanding all the licences for my properties were up to date, but I have recently seen an email which shared that licences are due to expire. I am in the process of renewing all licences. So, if the houses are dripping with mould and there's fire alarms hanging off the wall and some of the areas are unlit, you have to sort of wonder how they'd get a licence in the first place. But interesting. So a landlord and a letting agent. Sounds like the beginning of a joke. Landlord and a letting agent walked into a pub. Who's buying? A landlord and a letting agent both arguing that there are grounds to give the guy a break. I'm still not sure. And I think so far we all agree that you might unfairly or not expect this from a Tory, but you really expect better from a Labour MP. So someone put it very well, simply saying it really undermines Starmer's claim, or the adults are back in the room energy, says Junan, that Keir Starmer is going for. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:36 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Here's a blast from the past. Here's a little exchange with James Cleverly, of all people, in 2018. When he sent, they never learn, do they, these people? It's like a pompous message. Hi, Mr. James O'Brien. I understand I got a name check from you on LBC this morning. I didn't hear it, but it seems as if you got a key fact wrong. This may help. That's all. Yeah, that always is going to end well, isn't it? I have absolutely no idea what you said, but here's something different. And what I had done was list the 72 Tory MPs who, in September of 2018, were found to have received rental incomes in excess of £10,000 while voting against a Labour amendment compelling landlords to make homes fit for human habitation. James Cleverly was one of them, and I added somewhat immaturely, as with Brexit, you could have avoided embarrassment here by finding out the facts beforehand. And someone's dug that out, I think, because it speaks to this slightly or possibly unfair idea I have that I am not surprised when Tory MPs turn out not only to be landlords, but also to have voted against an opportunity to make homes, quotes, fit for human habitation, end quotes, with the obvious caveat that it's a Labour amendment, so there's mischief attached and there's political capital at play, which has nothing to do with tenants or landlords or letting agents. But the biggest landlord in the House of Commons at the moment is a Labour MP. Is that a problem? 0345 606 0973. And how big a deal is that? How big a scandal is it that he was letting out properties via an agent that were in a pretty grim state and has subsequently claimed to know nothing about it? I have to give some serious credit to David. It's only signed as a David, although I feel that I should have your national insurance number and a PayPal account in order to show my full appreciation of what you've done here. So you remember a minute ago I said it sounds like the beginning of a joke. I said a landlord and a letting agent walked into a pub. David has written a punchline that is actually about as good as you could possibly hope for with that setup. Are you ready for it? So a landlord and a letting agent walked into a pub and they said to the landlord, "Have you got any tenants?" That's just brilliant, isn't it? That's like, David, mate, you're top of the class. Take the rest of the week off, in fact. I tell your boss I said so. David, it's got the rest of the week off. 10:38 is the time. Paul's in Godstone. Back to this story, Paul. What do you make of it all?
Hi, James. Hi. Well, I look at things very simply. The man is not a professional landlord, which means he does not care. He simply does not care. He hasn't inspected his flats. He hasn't gone round when problems have occurred to see what's going on.
No, but he's paid someone to do that.
Well, James, the thing is, with managing agents...
Let's say, for the sake of argument, Paul, that I don't mow my own lawn. But I care very much about my lawn, which is why I pay someone to mow it for me. I don't. I mow my own lawn. I don't want any champagne socialism act. I mow my own lawn and I tend my own raised beds. Yeah. But to say that because I pay someone else to look after it means I don't care about it. I sent my children to private school because I care about them. I didn't educate them myself. I don't know that you can say he doesn't care about his tenants because he's paying somebody to care for them.
No, James, no.
Paul.
Any issue, James, whatever it may be by a tenant, the landlord is informed by the agent. And
he clearly hasn't been in this case.
Well, he says that. We don't know that. But there are different levels of managing agents.
But every other landlord we've spoken to says that you would. I mean, we just spoke to a letting agent who said the landlord wouldn't know about it. That's why she ended up. So we know that's not true.
Well, there are different levels of managing agents. One is simply to check the rent for a landlord. The other is where they'll charge maybe 15 or 20% to manage the property.
Which is what's happening here.
Yeah, but that doesn't change the fact that he hasn't gone to his flats, his homes, to check out how his tenants are doing.
But he's paid the agent to do that.
No, James, that's not an excuse. Of course it's an excuse. It might not be a valid excuse, but it's the definition of an excuse. It's also an explanation. I am paying these people a significant sum of money to check up on these properties. Well, that's on the basis that what you've heard is correct. I
can't conduct a conversation based on what we haven't heard, can we, Paul?
Well, all I know is, James, that as a professional...
Stop saying my name. It's creeping me out.
Okay. 50 years I've been a professional landlord.
Yes.
I care. I go around. I see the problems. I deal with it. I have people who can deal with things.
Yes. Do you pay an agent?
No, I don't.
Well, then, with respect, that's not relevant to the conversation that we're having, Paul. Celia's in Aberdare. Celia, what would you like to say?
Hello there, James.
Hello there, Celia.
Well, I'm a first-time landlord. I've just rented out my very first property. And after spending quite a bit of time while renovating my property on UK landlord sites, talking to other landlords, I found out that a lot of agents are really rubbish, to be honest.
Yes, I think that is emerging from this conversation, probably more than anything else.
Yeah. So I decided I was going to do it all myself. We have to have do a course. We have to license ourselves in Wales. There are a lot of legal, things we have to do in order to do that. But I decided that I didn't want somebody else checking up on my property for, the reasons we're talking about. So I'll be doing it all myself.
Oh, we'll see. We'll see.
I'm a Labour supporter.
Yes. Do you feel any political tension between your principles and your landlord status?
I don't, because I think, we all have to make a living somehow. I'm not going to overcharge my tenants.
No.
I'm going to make sure everything is done properly and that they are happy and comfortable in their home.
Have you got a tenant yet?
I have got a tenant, yes.
And when they ring you in the middle of the night and say the radiator is leaking, what are you going to do?
It's absolutely fine if that's what they have to do. But I don't think they'll be doing that because I'm going to give them, all the information they need of what to do in emergencies, etc., etc. But one thing while I'm on, before you shut me off, I do want to say this.
Never shut people. Well, hang on, I can't say that. I don't know where you're going now. Carry on. I might shut you off.
This is controversial, and especially as I'm a Labour supporter.
Yes.
But I have given my tenants all the information about how to avoid damp and mould situations like that, which, in any of our homes, we have to be vigilant for. It's not just, in rental properties, it's in every property that we have to do this. And if they're not told how to do it, then, there is a little bit of...
I see what you mean. That's not controversial in the sense that hopefully the property where you've got doesn't have it, and therefore measures you can take it like ventilation or even in some cases dehumidifiers will make it less likely to happen. But I have lived in flats where I could have been a cross between Lawrence Llewellyn Bowen and Alan Titchmarsh, and I wouldn't have been able to really touch the sides of the infrastructural state of the place that I was living in. Do you see what I mean? So
I do, but then that's definitely the landlord's problem, because in between tenancies, he should be looking at the property, or she, to check that these things are aren't a problem. You can't, nobody should be renting out a property in that state. And
that is where the "it wasn't me, Gov" defence begins to fall down, doesn't it?
If you're renting out to someone new and that hasn't been addressed, yes, definitely. But in between times, I think the agent is mostly responsible, really. Okay, so
there's a bit of balance there, but I don't think this fella's off the hook by any stretch of the imagination. Final question, I promise. Yeah. 15 properties, biggest landlord in the House of Commons is a Labour MP. Yeah. Are we cool with that?
Yeah. I'm cool with that,
okay,
as long as he's doing his job properly.
What a great point. As long as he's doing his job properly, even perhaps to the point of being an exemplar. And he clearly isn't, despite the fact that he thought he was. If we take his comments in good faith, he thought he was, because he thought the agent was imposing the high standards to which he wants to be held. Well, you're being held to them now, mate. In fact, glancing at my switchboard, first up after the break is Andrew embarking to you, or indeed to his colleagues at the London Assembly, Andrew Boff, who is a Conservative member of the London Assembly and currently chair of it. Be interesting to see what's prompted him to pick up the phone with regards to this story.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:48 is the time. A Labour MP has sacked the agency which manages his rental flats after an investigation by the BBC found black mould and ant infestations and other problems in his properties. There's quite a degree of reverse ferreting by Jas Athwal, the MP for Ilford South and former leader of Redbridge Council, shifting essentially from denial to abject apology and culminating overnight in what appears to be a wholesome promise not only to reimburse everybody concerned. I think he used the phrase from my own pocket. Oh no, every tenant that is out of pocket will be reimbursed for repairs or renewals, and he will be issuing each tenant with a personal apology and meeting with them urgently. But it is the road to this point that is perhaps most interesting. 10:49 is the time, and the question of whether this is an adequate response to the problems over which he has presided and attempted to essentially lay entirely at the door of his agent. Andrew Boff, full disclosure is probably important, is a Conservative politician, chair of the London Assembly, and actually pertinently perhaps also a former council leader. And Andrew has phoned in on this story, so not going to let an opportunity like this pass by, but you do have a personal involvement in it, I think, Andrew.
Yes, well, I was alerted to the problems at this flat back on the 1st of August. And, because I never believe anything anybody ever tells me, I thought I'd better go and see it for myself. So I went canvassing, as we politicians do. We go out on the door and ask people's problems and all the rest of it. So I canvassed that particular block and some others as well. And got the usual stuff about, rubbish collection not so good, could do something with the noisy road. And then residents said, but there are problems inside the flats as well. And they invited me in, and I had a look round, and I was absolutely horrified that the conditions that people were expected to live in. Now, all these tenants were trying to make the best. They were trying to make very good homes out of what was a very poor environment. So I was astonished by this. First of all, I just made sure that I believed what I was seeing, that this was Jas Athwal's property. And try to confirm what many of the residents had said to me about what the agent had said to them. And quite frankly, it was. And so I also took photographs as well, many of which I'm not releasing because I don't have the permission of the tenants, because the tenants do fear for their homes. And So
they're probably
I can't
safe.
release
They're
those.
probably safe now. I'm not suggesting you should breach their privacy, but I can't imagine anyone's going to.
Certainly not.
There's not going to be any
No,
strong arm tactics in the context of where this story has gone subsequently.
I think that was an argument that we tried to use with the tenants, but honestly, that's not a good enough argument.
I agree.
When somebody is perilous, is tenuously holds on to their homes, saying that media attention will result in them being even more secure, it doesn't really work. And so I won't release those, and without those tenants' permissions. But in the common areas, we're bad enough with things like fire alarms hanging from threads. And broken CO2 alarms, generally poor condition.
And as has been established, the tenants had complained and brought many, if not all, of these matters to the attention of the managing agent. It would be remiss of me not to remind my listeners that you have a vested interest here, politically speaking. Your original tip-off would have been there's a flat round the corner, it's in a right old state, and the landlord is a Labour MP or the landlord is a Labour politician. But that notwithstanding, photographic evidence and testimony from tenants and the quality of Joe Pike's reporting for the BBC is beyond reproach. How much, and I'm just reminding you of that because I'd like you to answer this question objectively. How valid a defence is the role of the agent in the entire process? How much expectation can you place upon a landlord who is paying somebody else to do the things that have not been done?
Well, you check up on your agent, don't you? If you're investing not just your money and your business, but also your reputation in an agent, you would have thought that you would have checked up. You would have thought that you'd have been responsible. But some of the things that have been exposed since, it was bad enough, the quality of the property that he maintains. What was a real problem for me is what can only be described as the hypocrisy of introducing a licensing scheme, which on the face of it, according to them, was there in order to look after the interests of tenants, and then not registering yourself. Now, first of all, it brings into question the value of these licensing schemes. And I've always been very dubious about them, James. I think they're just a list of honest landlords. Because
that's not necessarily because the people that would have the problems are not going to sign up to the scheme in the first place.
Well, precisely. They're not going to sign up to the scheme, but the honest landlords are forking out hundreds of pounds per property in order to get on a list of other honest landlords. And what actually the local authority should be doing is going out and proactively looking for these tenancies using their local knowledge.
The ones that need help and protection ideally from their local politicians and the local authorities. What do you think? And again, I am conscious of your party political loyalties and therefore biases. What do you think Keir Starmer should do to Jas Athwal right now?
Well, I'm not a member of the Labour Party, it's not up to me. However, what one can say is that if a party is serious about rental rights, if they're serious about improving the conditions of private rental properties, and then they take no action against one of their number who have proven to have fallen very short, not just on the quality of housing, but the non-registration of being a landlord. And also, James, the instruction that was indicated, Jas Athwal has indicated, that he doesn't want to let to anybody on benefits. Now, if they take no action...
That's illegal, isn't it?
Well, I believe...
it's in the realm of report at the moment.
It's very close. It's very close to being illegal. And if especially when you consider the condition of some of these properties, it beggars belief. But if they take no action against him, then that will show how serious they are about improving the conditions for tenants in private renting.
Trick question for you at the end. Why do you think your party's friends in the media, who are normally sticking Labour politicians who've dared to say boo to a goose or move a picture of Margaret Thatcher from one room to another, why are they all so quiet about this story?
Well, I'm not quiet.
No, you're not. You're not a right-wing journalist. Why are all the newspapers that were trying to persuade us that Susan Hall would be a good mayor? Why have they all got nothing to say about this?
I think that's a really good question to put to them.
Well, you speak to them more often than I do, Andrew.
I really don't know. I mean, I've had the Daily Mail on to me, and I've had the Sunday Times. I don't know. I don't know, James. I don't know in your personal view what makes right wing and left wing. So
I was reading bizarrely.
I don't know where the middle point is.
No, but bizarrely, I was reading a tweet from your colleague Susan Hall complaining about the lack of media coverage. Although she seems to think that the media is biased in favour of the Labour Party. But if we were going to,
I'm an old timer in politics, James. And one of the things I do know is that you always think the media is biased against you, whether or not you're on the left or on the right.
Well,
and the fact is,
there's a conversation.
complaining about the media is like complaining about the weather. So it really doesn't move the world forward.
I couldn't agree more. 10:57, we should all be complaining about politicians instead. For the record, Jas Athwal has said that he did not take on tenants on housing benefit in order to avoid conflicts of interests with his role as the local council leader, which is certainly worthy of further examination. Andrew Andrew Boff, leader of the London Assembly and a politician who clearly played a role in bringing this story to public attention. Many thanks indeed for your time. I think Starmer's got to act on this. I think for some of the reasons that Andrew said, party loyalties notwithstanding, I just think this paints an appalling picture of this MP's and the most prominent landlord in the House of Commons, the biggest landlord in the House of Commons, becomes, whether he likes it or not, whether Starmer likes it or not, whether Jas Athwal likes it or not, he becomes a poster boy for Labour's attitude to issues of tenancy, issues of landlording. And to stay silent, to do nothing, is remiss. It's delinquent. It's not on. It's not good enough. Jenny's in Ilford, which is the patch concerned. Jenny, what would you like to say?
Hi. I don't want to knock Redbridge Council too much, that's the council that Ilford is in, because they provide excellent facilities, generally. Sure. But I've become a first-time landlord recently.
There's a lot of it about.
When we tried to rent our property out, we knew that we had to get this landlord licence. But I think in Redbridge they had recently changed the sort of boundaries, because there's certain areas where you need a licence and certain areas where you don't need a licence.
Right.
And there was this new boundary change, so we had to get a licence. But to even apply for the licence on the website wasn't even working properly. So we were told to apply several months later when the website would be working. And then when we did apply, it took several months.
So there are problems with the system by which you get the licences. But the point is that the landlord we're talking about here was the leader of the council who brought in the licensing.
Yeah, I know.
So I don't think he gets to complain about the state of the system, does he, Jenny?
No, he doesn't. But I think in order to, I don't know whether to transfer his old licence to new licences, there's been delays. Because there's been new boundaries that have been put in, and it's all changed.
May have played a part,
yeah.
And that may come slightly to the defence of the agent on this specific issue. But as Andrew Boff has reminded us, there are many other issues in play in this, for me at least, this very unpleasant story that are not going to go away, or at least they won't go away if the rest of the media start doing their job properly. Thank you, Jenny. I think this is accurate. Dave in Wimbledon quoting the MP concerned: as the landlord, the buck stops with me, and I unreservedly apologise to my tenants for the unacceptable experiences they have endured. But again, it's not, for me at least, it's not good enough. You don't want your landlord turning up unannounced to check up on things, but you should certainly have a slightly firmer hand on the tiller than this character has managed to provide. Up next, a grim story on the front of the Daily Mirror about racist school children. But honestly, who's surprised?
James O'Brien on LBC.
4 minutes after 11 is the time. This is a really good point from Jen in Romford, just by way of a full stop, or at least a semicolon on the conversation we were having in the last hour. These people are lucky that they have him as their landlord, because he is in the public eye. There are thousands of tenants in similar positions whose landlords remain nameless and faceless. It's a really good point, actually, Jen, in Romford, which I had missed. Listening to Thomas's report there on a party that has deep neo-Nazi associations and affiliations winning a regional election in the former East Germany, in regions which almost inevitably have some of the lowest levels of immigration in the whole of Germany. But it is that rabidly anti-immigration rhetoric that has attracted them. I couldn't help hearing that in the same space as a story from this country about the number of school children being sent home, suspended for racism, up to 60 pupils a day. 11,619 children suspended for racist behaviour in 2023. That's up 25% on the previous 12 months. And, I mean, who honestly can claim to be surprised? Hand on heart, looking at the state of public discourse in this country and the prominence afforded to professional racists in politics and the media, who can honestly claim to be surprised that that has now filtered down even to kindergartens? Yeah, I thought not. So what do we do about it? I've got two problems with this story. One is obvious. I hate racism, and the idea of children being infected with it at such an early age is heartbreaking, not just, of course, for their victims, but for them as well. To be inculcated with hate, it sets them up for a lifetime of bitterness and anger, with all of their bitterness and anger being directed at entirely the wrong targets, while the people who are, if they are more sinned against than sinning, the people who are responsible for their plight will be laughing all the way to the bank. But the other reason I don't like this story is if you're going to summon sympathy for children who've been radicalised by adults or by social media, and if it's by adults, then it is more than likely that it's by their parents. I don't think that a 6-year-old is going to be made racist by his mates or his peers. He's going to be bringing it from home, right? Or not? Or at least the first one will have brought it from home, and then he might be able to infect his friends. But if you are keen to recognise that these children need help, then do you abandon the victim? So I tell you why, and this is possibly white privilege kicking in. My first thought was, I'm not sure suspending them is the right thing to do. Because if they've got it from their parents rather than the internet, then they go home and tell their parents they've been suspended for being racist. What are they going to get? Probably get a pat on the back. Well done, son, that's my boy. You saw people taking their children to the Farage riots. Taking their own children to the most racist or the most unpleasant explosion of racist violence that we've seen in our streets in generations. So what's going to happen to that kid? I've been suspended from school, Dad. What for? Oh, I called Abdul a bleep, 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 bleep. Because that's what you say every time Sadiq Khan appears on the telly. Oh, okay, son. Yeah, well done. That's my boy. Well done. So how is that a punishment? So then you find yourself thinking, well, they should have done something else. But then you say, what about Abdul in this case? What message does it send to him if the kid who's abused him in the kind of language that is routinely directed at the Mayor of London when he appears on this programme? What does it say to him if the kid who's abused him in such a vicious fashion doesn't get punished? So 11,000, man. I don't think there's a phone-in to be had. I don't know how facetious or disingenuous you would have to be to ask questions about why this is happening. I really don't think there's any mystery there. The prominence of people like Farage, the state of Twitter since Elon Musk took over, the kind of people that write columns for The Spectator, are almost calling for pogroms on the streets of this country. It's clear that the poisoning of public discourse from the top down, while of course all of these public school educated bigots pretend that they're somehow representing working class values, it can turn heads. It can draw all sorts of poison to the surface. But we don't recognise, unless it's Shamima Begum, we don't actually think that people under the age of 16 are responsible for their radicalisation or indeed their subsequent actions. And that was a slightly tongue-in-cheek reference to Shamima Begum, who of course was 15 when she was groomed and trafficked by Islamist extremists. To which, if you are really stupid, you respond by saying, but she consented, which is exactly the problem that happened when grooming gangs were let off the hook somewhat by authorities, because authorities thought that a 15-year-old girl could consent to being raped. So that's supposed to be the approach that we have to the role of children or the ability of children to be responsible for their actions. But if I was black and some white kid called my child the N-word at school, I wouldn't want their feet to touch the ground. I wouldn't want to waste any time at all wondering about who'd radicalized him or who'd led him to such a position of poison. But neither do I want to overcomplicate the issue. So, children, as one contributor to this report by the Runnymede Trust has said, children are reflecting the hatred that has become a normalized feature of our political conversation. What should the punishment be? 0345 6060 973. And I think our way into this story will be the way in which always serves us best in these sort of in this sort of territory, particularly stories that I have no personal experience of, I don't think. What is it like when your child is racially abused at school? How do you know that it is getting worse? And what did the school do? And hopefully some of the answers to that question will include suspensions, in which case we can move into the second area of discussion, which is how confident can we be that suspending these children is the best thing for all concerned. And obviously I prioritise the feelings of the victim much, 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 much more than the feelings of the perpetrator. But if we want to move towards a space where this graph starts going down again, then what is the best way for schools to deal with these sort of incidences? So I think of all the race-related issues that I find most upsetting, it is the parent having to introduce their child to the prejudice they will face in their lives and the point at which that happens, whether it is being stopped and searched in a brutal and indiscriminate fashion by police officers, the conversation that black dads have to have with black lads about what their relationship with the police is going to be like going forward. It is by definition going to be different from the experiences of almost all white lads. But in school, you should be safe. In school, despite what you could chalk up as banter or even bullying, there should be lines that are never crossed. And racial abuse has historically been one of them. How we've ended up in a place where more children feel confident enough to cross those lines, or more children have become racist enough or repetitive of racism to cross those, to not know how important those lines are. I don't think, hand on heart, that can be a mystery to any of us, but I still want to know what it's like. So question number one, what happened to you or your child at school? When you were racially abused at school, what happened? 0345 6060 973. More likely to be your child that you're telling me about, because we're looking at an uptick, a 25% increase in this kind of bilious bigotry that has happened in the last 12 months. And but listen, I can't tell you not to tell me why. If you've got anything to add to the obvious, then you are more than welcome. 0345 6060 973. But how did the school deal with it? And is there any grounds here for positivity, in the sense that the school is now dealing with it in a way that they wouldn't have done when you were your child's age? Do you see what I mean? So sometimes when statistics rocket, it's because reporting has improved. And obviously that is not going to account for a 25% increase in this context. But it does speak to a world in which racism in school is taken a hell of a lot more seriously than it was in the 1970s, for example, or the 1980s or the 1990s. So what's it like when it happened? What happened? How did the school deal with it? And how confident can we be that suspending these children is the best response for all concerned? All right? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. A country in which you either take the 11,619 figure, children actually suspended for racist behaviour, so God knows how many more have done things that weren't quite worthy of suspension, but the 25% increase in 12 months leads us at looking at 60 suspensions a day. It's an argument to be made for saying, well, it's clearly not working very well. But is it the only tool that you as a teacher or a head teacher have in your armoury? And I don't know that. I'm obviously not going to get a call from a racist who's made their kid racist. But if you are a massive racist and your son gets sent home for being racist, you're not going to be punishing him, are you? Or trying to correct him or prioritising his education over your own bigotry and prejudice. So how can we be confident that it's even a good punishment in the context of adults usually being the conduit to racism that children have followed? Although if you can tell me a little bit about online radicalisation, then I'd be all ears for that as well. Let's get the phone lines open. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. 60 children suspended every day for racism in this country. Your story, your experience of that, and your view on whether suspending the culprits is definitely the best way forward.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 18 minutes after 11. 60 children in this country suspended every day for racism. Extraordinary figures, but the more you think about it, the less surprising they become. Let's dig into what the reality is like for you, for your family, and this crucial question for me of whether suspending these children, particularly if they've brought their racism to school from home, whether it is actually the best way forward. Karen says, James, I'd actually really like to hear from people who grew up with racist parents and what that's also something that we could have a look at, but possibly not today. It depends. 19 after 11 is the time. Marcia's in Daventry. Marcia, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I'm a mom of two boys, black boys, and I live in a little village. And unfortunately, my son, I was called 3 times last school term from January by the school to inform me that my son had experienced racist abuse at school. And at different occasions, I was sort of told the child's been spoken to. They've reported it to the police, which I was quite surprised by.
Can we, obviously within the boundaries of broadcast regulations, can we just establish what the abuse, what form it took? What was said or
verbal,
done?
Okay. Verbal.
And is
it's all verbal.
Is it the N word or is it what are we?
The N word, the M word, and also just language, sort of.
Enough for the school to consider calling the police.
I think what they do is that they have the school is attached to a local neighborhood police.
Right.
So I think the person came in and spoke to them. But actually, I don't know if it was reported as an incident, because I was advised that if I wanted to report it as an incident, I could do so. Okay. I could bring my own, which I felt was, of course, I didn't want to do that, because what I wanted to share is that I actually know this child very well. This child used to come and knock on my door and ask to play with my son, one of the first children who used to do so. And I was quite fond, and still am very fond of him, because they used to play football together. Yeah. And he was a cracking football player, and I used to cheer him on every weekend playing football, because he's that good. And I also know that this child has behavioral issues, that the parents would speak to me at the school gate and would sort of talk about challenges that we're having with our children. Okay. So it was very difficult, because I didn't want to, and I want to criminalize this child. However, it was quite upsetting when because I know the child, right, that I don't want this child being in a situation where they're upsetting my child.
No, of course not.
So
this is precisely the dilemma I was trying to describe, although I'm not sure that every mum in your position would be as generous. I think the phone line just dropped off there. We'll definitely get you back. I'm not sure every mum in that situation could be as generous towards the person abusing your child as you're being, Marcia. So, I mean, in that sense, you're an example to us all. But you've got to look out for your boy, ultimately, haven't you?
And this is the thing. I think I was being a social worker. I was sort of concerned by what's going on at home, what's going on with him. But then at the same time, having to think what's going on with my child, and also not wanting conversations, not wanting my son to be experiencing a situation where. Not wanting to have my son being taken out of school because they suddenly have to have well-being lessons when actually they're not the problem. And I guess that's the issue.
What does your boy think?
I mean, he's upset by it, but I think what I think is positive is that he goes to school, and sometimes he doesn't hear these words being used at him, but it's the other children that report it to him, and that report it to the school. Yeah. And then, so therefore, then they tell him, oh, so-and-so has said this about you, you know, and it's always the same child, you know. So it's just having those conversations with him, but I don't want to make him the problem where I'm sort of focusing on. No. But he's at that age where, 10 years old, 10, 11, where the reality of, you weren't black until you're now black. It wasn't an issue. You've grown up with these children. They've known you weren't different. But suddenly now the difference comes out when boys are fighting and they're arguing, which they will do, that suddenly there's a racial slur that will come out, which previously hasn't been the case.
What, in your own words, do you think has happened to his former friend?
Well, they're still friends, James.
Oh, okay.
That's the issue. They're still friends. They're boys. They are still friends. We live in the same community. If he's out playing football and he does see him, I'm not necessarily keen on him going to knock on the door or him coming to knock for him. However, what I think, not to sort of talk about the parent situation, but he does struggle. He struggles at school, has one-to-one, other issues. And I think that's where the issue is, and one of the things I don't say is that he will say to my son, at least I'm not black, those kind of terms, and and I think it's that thing where whatever's going on at home, and I don't think it's whether it's difficulty in learning, whether it's difficulty being in a classroom and sitting and having that tension, and with whether he's being supported, You're
very kind.
At some point,
you're very kind.
I'm being kind because I'm a social worker, and that's the problem. That sometimes I don't necessarily sit there and think I should be actually caring about my own son, and I'm thinking,
it sounds like so far you're managing to do both. I'm not there, obviously, but goodness me, it's an extraordinary thing to hear. Somebody who is concerned about the welfare of the person who is racially abusing their son, and if everybody was like you, the world would be a better place. And of course, if everybody was like, you're clearly avoiding, and I respect that, the possibility that this boy is repeating or echoing things that he's heard at home. But it must be. It would be something that many people listening are thinking about. But we don't need to focus in on him. That wouldn't be fair. We can continue to discuss the broader reality of it, because the days of being confident that kind of thing had come exclusively from home are probably over. The internet, various other influences as well. Marcia, thank you. This text here from someone who's asked me not to reveal their name makes the point better than I just managed to. I was a child of parents that were racist in the early noughties, James. I'm glad that back then I didn't have the internet to radicalise me alongside my parents. I think that would have truly doomed me. I was lucky and smart enough to realise that my parents were wrong at a young age because I was exposed to the right influences at school. Luckily, I never repeated anything that my parents had said either, but I definitely think if the internet had been around, as it is today, things would have been rather different, because there is so much radicalising content. In other words, you could bury yourself in posts, including from people who have quite high-powered jobs in the media and in politics in this country. You could bury yourself in posts that would make you think there was nothing wrong with what your parents were saying. 11:26 is the time. James is in Chichester. James, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello,
you've mentioned today that schools are struggling to deal with racism and how best to deal with it, and not to exclude the child.
I wonder about that. It's not for me to say. I'm wondering what the best route is, perhaps, in that kind of context.
And that's why I've rung up. I was used a racial slur against a young lad when I was at school, when I was about 13, 14 years old.
Okay.
And the headmaster, it was me and a few friends, a couple of mates or something, said something nasty to this lad. And the headmaster dragged us up in the middle of, in front of the whole school in an assembly, explained what had gone on. And I think that shameful episode was massively life-changing for me.
Really?
Hugely so.
Because you'd said it without thinking.
I would, and I spoke to the lady that the bit before the producer, and she said, did you get that from your parents? And that's the other comment. The other thing I wanted to make is that I'm not necessarily sure that it all comes from parents at all. My mum and dad have never been racist, and I would have been. And your producer also asked me, what did your parents say? And I said, well, I don't think they ever found out about it. And,
Gosh.
I would have been terrified had the headmaster threatened to ring my parents. So,
so the school dealt with it very well. I mean, it's interesting that you say, that was quite old school headmastering, wasn't it? Getting you, quite traumatic for you potentially as well, although prioritising the feelings of the boy you'd abused over yours is probably, but this is quite interesting from Sally, who says, I worked as an inclusion teacher in schools in the West Midlands for 27 years. Without exception, the schools that took a holistic approach towards inclusion, tolerance, care towards each other, had fewer problems with racism. Unfortunately, there weren't many schools like that, but suspension is a rubbish punishment. Schools sadly have few tools at their disposal. Things got much better in the late 90s and early noughties, but I'm appalled at how bad it has become now. Did it work on the other lads, the lads that you were with?
I can't honestly say. I made a choice at that point in my life to try and distance myself from what was, a naughty bunch of lads or bad group of lads. Remember my grandmother saying, you've got, two choices. You can go down the wrong path or the right path. And, luckily I've chosen the right path. But
well, good for you. And the headmaster can look back on that as a success. He probably knew what he was doing as well. It is that idea of sometimes being forced to look in the mirror. And what he did by standing you up in front of the whole of assembly, he made you see what they could see. He made you look in the mirror, and you did not like what was looking back, so you changed it. And it's obviously stayed with you. It's obviously a lesson that has resonated with you through the years. Does it work though? That message from Sally, does the suspension work, which is the point of the story? I find it easier to get my head around James's treatment being effective. The parental angle is nuanced. It's not going to be the only means by which you end up doing things like that. Children, and again, I'm a little uncomfortable saying this because it's unlikely that me or mine will ever be on the receiving end of it, but children can throw around words sometimes without meaning it or without thinking about them in a way that adults are, you wouldn't excuse among adults, but among children, responsibility is a much more complicated issue. So how do you know it's the best thing to do? Belittling and shaming racists is always a good thing, says Ben. I even begin to wonder about that sometimes, particularly when you see it being corrupted. You see the claim being turned into something valid or being described as a legitimate concern. So then you do the belittling and the shaming, and the grievance actually grows, and they end up inventing things like two-tier policing to justify their continuing positions. I don't know. If it was my kid, I'd probably want them suspended. But Marcia was a master class, wasn't she, or a mistress class in what proper tolerance and compassion sounds like. It's 11:31. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:34. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we turn our attention somewhat further afield now, necessarily, given the scenes in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem overnight and for 6 families of Hamas hostages, the worst imaginable news was delivered this weekend as well. But it's when you combine those two events together that the situation becomes a little confusing, because it is against the Israeli government that protests are now gathering pace, and it is essentially a call upon the Israeli government to do more, that is seeing a general strike begin this morning in Israel, one that could paralyse much of the country. If you have been following this issue via this programme, then, well, two things. Number one, you'll know how much help Noga Tarnapolsky has provided, and we will return to her in Jerusalem shortly. But you'll also know that there has been, once you got your head around the idea that Benjamin Netanyahu was prioritising his own political survival over everything, up to and including the fate of the hostages, then a sort of grim inevitability creeps into events. Once you have accepted that, the tolerance, not just the tolerance, but the promotion of criminals and terrorists in his own cabinet as a proof of the prioritisation of his own political survival over everything else in play, which you can sit alongside the evilness and the depravity of Hamas. You can hold two thoughts in your head at the same time, as Ben Kentish rather brilliantly explained on this radio station this weekend. Once you accept Netanyahu's approach, there is, well, to my eye, my untutored eye, there is a gross inevitability to what we are seeing now, where protesters are blocking roads in Israel to demand a deal with Hamas over the ceasefire and the fate of the remaining hostages. Noga Tarnapolsky joins us now from Jerusalem. Is that a fair analysis of the situation, do you think, Noga? What would you add?
Hi, James. Yes, I do think so. And I think we have to add something that's difficult to discuss, but that has to be added in order to explain the eruption of emotion among Israelis. And it's the just abject, cruel, grotesque manner of these 6 hostages' deaths, because it's not a situation like has already happened in the past year, in which the cadavers of hostages were found and, months after they died or were killed, and as a result, the autopsies deliver kind of murky results.
Sure.
It's just not the case. These are 6 young people, and they were alive days ago. The forensic results were extremely clear that they were executed. They were days or minutes before their bodies were found. They were taken. They were shot numerous times, point blank in the heads. And so you think about young people, some of them gravely wounded, who managed to survive 11 months underground of torture, and were executed, shot point blank. People are talking about their last minutes of terror and that sort of thing. And that has really had a huge impact, the manner of their deaths.
You would need to explain to my listeners who haven't been following events super closely why this would see an explosion of anger against the government, while the government continues to justify its actions in Gaza by promising that they're doing their very best to get these hostages home. So the anger, to the untutored eye, should be directed at the terrorists. It should be directed at Hamas. And Netanyahu has cast himself as the man who will destroy Hamas. So what's gone wrong with that narrative?
If that's the crucial question. If you'll allow me, I want to quote a sentence from the American writer Franklin Foer, who I think managed to synthesize this. And what he writes is, he writes about the American-Israeli hostage Hersh Goldberg Poland, and he says his murder, the moral culpability for his murder rests entirely with Hamas depraved executioners. But Netanyahu behaved grotesquely when presented with opportunities to secure his release.
Right.
So what your listeners need to know is that on the night between Thursday and Friday, which turns out to be apparently the estimated time that these young people were taken out and executed, Netanyahu forced through his security cabinet, which is about half of his normal cabinet, a declarative decision announcing that no matter what hostage release deal is proposed to Israel, and no matter what Israel has agreed to in the past, the Israeli army will remain indefinitely on the Gaza-Egypt border. So not an Israeli border. And on the one hand, this is a meaningless, just declarative kind of decision passed by cabinet. This was passed at 2 a.m., by the way, with no announcement that this would even be brought to cabinet. But on the other hand, Israelis view it as the prime minister hijacking messaging in order to let Hamas know at a crucial moment in the hostage release negotiations that the hostages they're holding have no value to him. So what Netanyahu may perceive as showing his base that he's a tough guy and that he's tough against Hamas, it appears that a majority of Israelis perceive it as him choosing his own political survival, therefore winking at his base, instead of taking the brave and difficult decisions that a leader must take to save his own sequestered citizens.
So then we come, not for the first time, to the question of the leverage that portion of the population can exert upon Netanyahu. And the scale of the protests, compounded by the strike, is the strongest expression of that leverage we've seen so far.
Yes, and Israel really is kind of in a stranglehold. It's very difficult to describe, but about 500,000, an estimated 500,000 Israelis took to the streets last night on a Sunday night, which is a weeknight in Israel, and out of a population of just under 10 million.
Gosh.
Maybe you can translate that to British terms, but I did the calculation for Americans, and it's as if 15 million Americans had taken to the streets. And yet, the government, which has a very narrow but very unified kind of coalition majority, 64 out of 120 parliamentary seats, seems just to have seen its back stiffen. They seem to be responding to this protest and their magnitude by saying, we'll show you. And so over the course of the last few hours, Israeli government ministers have just doubled down on their messages of how they're going to just kind of intensify the fighting against Hamas. And again, we have to go back to what you said. I don't think there's a single Israeli of any sort who has any doubts that Hamas is a murderous Islamist militia, merciless. But that's not the point. For Israelis, the point is that they feel betrayed by their own government. And the government, in response to that, is basically saying, go scream on the streets. We don't care.
So how does it end?
I don't know. I don't know yet. And I feel like I'm kind of doubling down on my own journalistic training, and I'm limiting myself very closely to just telling you what is happening, because this could still explode in different directions, and it could end very, very badly for everybody. And so I don't want to guess or speculate. The Americans, I have to say, even though it's a holiday weekend for them, do seem to be showing some muscle. Maybe because this American citizen was killed, and maybe because they also feel it could have been prevented, but also because their elections are coming up. And I think that the Biden administration has more or less had it with Netanyahu's,
So how much has Netanyahu got riding on the hope of Trump coming back in then, do you think? Or are we beyond that kind of calculation now?
Well, according to the Israeli political reporters who follow him most closely, he has a lot riding on it. From what I see more from the point of view of a foreign correspondent here, he does and he doesn't. In other words, clearly, openly, he hopes that Donald Trump will win. He doesn't hide that. But I think he's also flexing muscle in an effort to show Kamala Harris, who he may not take as seriously as he should, to show her, see what I care.
Okay.
In much the same way as he's showing that to the Israeli population. And in this way, he may be actually harming Israel gravely, because if his message to a future American president is, see what I care, that president could gain a lot of popularity among her own base in the United States by saying, okay, bye-bye.
Yeah. And that, of course, has been a concern for everybody who refuses to see an Israeli life or a Palestinian life as different. The concern has always been that Israel will end up alienating its allies and jeopardizing its future security, while, of course, the carnage continues in Gaza. And I shouldn't have asked you that question. I shouldn't have sought to compromise your journalistic training, Noga. So I apologise for that. But you'll understand why the search for some sort of clarity or a clearer picture of what the light at the end of the tunnel may look like is one that concerns us all. Noga Tarnapolsky speaking to us live there from Jerusalem about the escalating situation there. And in the interests precisely of that objectivity, I would remind you, or perhaps bring to your attention news from the other side of the border between Gaza and Israel, that 640,000 children now have been targeted by the World Health Organization for vaccination after polio has reappeared in that territory for the first time in 25 years. The figure of the dead stands just north of 40,000 at the moment, with just shy of 100,000 wounded, although when the actual counting is completed after peace is finally imposed or achieved, those numbers are widely regarded to be set to skyrocket. And the likelihood of this ending anytime soon, given what Noga has just told us there, seems not to be diminished by the extraordinary scenes on the streets of Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, and the action now, nationwide industrial action, a strike that is poised to bring the entire country to a standstill, calling upon Netanyahu to essentially recalibrate his prioritization of his own political future over everything else. His own defense minister. I mean, it's a mark of just how messy the whole situation is. Yoav Gallant calling on the security cabinet to reverse the decision that Noga Tarnapolsky was just describing to us about making a continued Israeli military presence along that Egypt-Gaza border a requirement for any ceasefire deal. So, it's just horrible and heartbreaking in every imaginable sense. But I make no apology for seeing the life of the 6 Israelis murdered in cold blood, apparently by Hamas this weekend. I feel just as sad and just as upset about those as I do about the continuing killings in Gaza as well. And I don't want to say I told you so, but I warned many people whose loyalty to Benjamin Netanyahu was absolutely unquestioning that they were doing more harm to their cause than they could ever realize. And now look where we are. 40,000 dead in Gaza. Hostages perceived to have been abandoned by Benjamin Netanyahu because the critique of his tactics is still not fully permitted. Even in this country, you'll still get people who claim that criticizing what Benjamin Netanyahu has done and is doing is somehow biased or prejudiced or bigoted or, God forbid, anti-Semitic. So, well done, you. It's 11:47.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 11:51. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Sorry, I just I took a slug of ginger juice just then, and I didn't realise we were coming back quite so quickly. I feel I should tell you this stuff. I feel it draws you in to the moment. It draws you into the time that we spend together. But I appreciate others may see it as a display of remarkable lack of professionalism. Let's get back to the conversation in hand, the conversation about the number of children being suspended from British schools for racism, some as young as 4. I don't know how helpful it is to send a 4-year-old home for this kind of thing, but it's easy for me to say because it's not my 4-year-old who's been on the receiving end of it. It is 11:51 and Rashid is in Caterham. Rashid, what would you like to say?
Thanks for taking my call. My experience is really quite sad because I've got a son, he's 8 now, and he's been experiencing racism right from the time he started school, which was 4. So it's been going on since it was 4. And what this has done is that it because we've had to introduce him to the whole concept and topic and everything about racism. So his innocence in that sense has been lost. He's had to defend himself, at school. And I mean, the first major incident I can recall was that he was excluded from playing with a certain group of boys because of the colour of his skin.
Did they say that was the reason why?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes. They said you're not like us. You're black. Yeah, right. You're black, and therefore his school is predominantly white. I'd say it's about 95% white, which is not an issue. It shouldn't be an issue anyway. But unfortunately, in some cases, I think that dominance might be an issue. I'm not sure. But the most recent one, there's been lots of other ones like where he's described the colour of his skin is described as it's like poo. So it's not the hard stuff. It's not the N word, that's being used, but it's things like the colour of your skin. basically his colour is a problem. Every other thing is fine. You know, he's a great friend, he's a great player, but his colour is the issue, and that's it, all the time it keeps coming up. And the most recent one was where he was told that he's weird because of the colour of his skin. And this has made him very guarded. You know, he's got to be very cagey. He's got to be, you know.
Can you see the change? Do you know that he's?
Well, it's been there from the beginning. So,
and he tells you all this, which is good, isn't it?
He comes home. Yeah, absolutely. He comes home and tells us, you know.
And what about the school, Rashid? What are the school doing? How do the school handle it?
This is the interesting bit. I think the school are not handling it properly, and I think this is where I think in some cases schools need to have special dedicated lessons. You know, maybe where they teach children about racism and why it's wrong and so on. And the last issue where he was told that he's weird because of the colour of his skin, when he mentioned it to the teacher basically, you know, to put it crudely, fobbed him off and said, no, you must have misheard. Probably it was the wrong thing. And the only reason why it was picked up was because the other students who also heard it said it, you know, came out and said, no.
No, he really did say that.
Yeah, that they heard, well, it was a she, but they did actually hear it being said. So, you know, that was when it was then picked up. But I still.
And what punishment was handed down?
Well, I think the parents, you know, because I did, again, you know,
but what was the punishment of the little girl that said that to your boy?
Well, I think the school didn't do anything really, but the mother did. The mother of the child did, you know, and she apologized. She actually came up to me and apologized. And this is why sometimes I'm not sure it's coming from the home.
No, I think that's a recurring theme this hour, actually. It's a bit lazy of me, perhaps, to presume that. Although, I mean, it's going to be part of the conversation. But she was mortified, was she?
Yes, absolutely, and embarrassed. And she came up to her and really did apologise, and it was really touching for her to do that, because kids, you know, will be kids. But I think, you know, what really annoyed me was the way it was dealt with by the school, because, you know, when they tried to fob him off, it was almost like they just didn't want to deal with this issue because it's so contentious. I think they, you know, just put it down to you misheard, you know. But there were several other
not taking it seriously. Students. Would it? I mean, briefly, because I want to squeeze in one more call, Rashid.
Sure.
Wouldn't have helped, would it, for that child to have been suspended from school?
No, absolutely not. I really, I mean, they're so young. I just don't think, sometimes I don't even think they understand what they're saying. You know, some of them perhaps do.
Which means explanation is going to be a much more powerful response than expulsion, or suspension, expulsion in the short term. Rashid, thank you. I'm sorry not to talk for longer, but I do want to hear from Mark as well in Petersfield. Mark, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James.
Hello, mate.
Very live for us. So my son's in the car with me today. Obviously, you're not going to speak to him, but you can chat to me.
Okay.
And he suggested that I call in today because it's a live issue for us. So he's 11, very keen cricketer, and has been attending camps, organised camps to play over the summer, and came home one afternoon completely out of the blue. He'd had a racist slur used against him. So I'm white British, but my wife is Pakistani heritage, so my children are dual heritage.
Yeah.
And so I think possibly for the first time he had faced a racist slur, came home absolutely devastated, and actually it wasn't him that told me initially. I had calls from other parents whose children had come home crying about what had happened to my son.
Good grief.
And so obviously
how did you feel when you took those calls?
Well, I mean, devastated initially. I also felt quite sorry for the other children that were upset about it, but it showed me the depth of friendships that my son has, which is a real treasure, right? Kids looking out for each other. What was really impressive, though, and what stood out for me, is how the clubs handled it. And they have young coaches that sort of work in small groups with the kids in their teens, late teens often, the coaches. And the young coach who was handling my son's group jumped all over it, sat all the kids down immediately and gave them quite a strong lecture about why it was wrong and why the club won't tolerate it.
Oh.
And then since then, the chairman of the club's picked it up as well. So it just shows you that it is possible for this stuff to be taken seriously. And we live in a very predominantly white area, 95% white area now. And
your lad your boy wanted you to ring in as an example of how things can be handled effectively. He was happy with this outcome.
Well, I think he is pretty happy with it because it shows that obviously that his friends have stood up for him, but also that the coaches that he's
it's brilliant. But how would either of you have felt about the lad who abused him being chucked out of the club, for example?
So we haven't seen him since, James.
Okay, so the message may have been delivered, as it were.
I suspect the message is you're not welcome here at the moment. Yeah. I don't think it's very fair if he's been pushed out forever, but that's not for me to judge. But the club, has got a good reputation, and they don't want kids not turning up because they're too upset to go, do they?
No, of course not. Not in a million years. You're right. This is an uplifting story, albeit that it begins with a situation that you wouldn't want your son to be put in at all. Although, I presume your wife probably saw it coming more than you did, or not?
I think she's been more prepared for it than me because she faced a lot of racism, the P word growing up, and our eldest son, who is darker skinned actually than our youngest. Our youngest could pass for English, but people know that his mum's Pakistani, so. Yes, I mean, they're probably more prepared for it than I was, yeah.
Will you pass on my compliments to your son, please, and thank him for encouraging his dad to make such a helpful and powerful contribution to the programme?
You've just told him yourself, James, he can hear you.
Thank you, mate.
Thank you.
Cheers, Mark. You mind how you go? It's coming up to 12 noon. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I'm tempted to go a bit shallow end now. I just felt that this weekend everyone was talking about it, and I have felt they all started laughing at me on the news desk earlier today because I like to come at stories with a little bit more thoughtfulness than perhaps is normal in this context. So I'm not going to say, did you get any tickets for Oasis? 0345 606 0973. But I do understand that when they overheard me saying to one of their colleagues, has it compromised your relationship with the band in any way? Do you feel that it's emotionally compromised? They all started laughing at me. And on reflection, I can see why. So I need to ask you that question about whether the ticket selling debacle has changed your view of Oasis without sounding so pompous.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 3 minutes after 12. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where the big story in many houses this weekend was, of course, about the difficulties of securing tickets for the Oasis concert. And, I mean, we got stuck into the excitement surrounding the announcement that the brothers had buried the hatchet, the Gallagher brothers had buried the hatchet and were set to take to the stage again, albeit that it's not technically Oasis. It's an iteration of Oasis. I was part of the excitement. I felt that I'm always a little bit confused about if I do a conversation, if we have a conversation with each other and I say something, let me think of a good example of this. If I say something like Oasis are a very popular band, right? That's an unequivocal statement, right? It's an unchallenged. Oasis are a very popular band. I don't want to upset anybody accidentally. I'm always delighted to upset people deliberately, but I don't want to upset anybody accidentally. So I say this cautiously. I will never understand why you would then send me a text saying, well, I don't like them. I say Oasis are a very popular band. And you telling me, well, I don't like them. That doesn't change anything. It doesn't stop Oasis being a very popular band. So, it's a bit like saying cheese is delicious. And then you send me a message saying, I hate cheese. It's like, I know that not everybody likes cheese. Not everybody likes Oasis. But evidently and statistically and objectively and clearly, they are a very popular band. So don't send me a message. I know what you're going to do now. You're so predictable sometimes. I'm going to get a million messages now saying I don't like Oasis, aren't I? And this is not a conversation about Oasis. This is a conversation about capitalism. I just said I was going to try not to be pompous. This is a conversation about capitalism and about something a little bit weird that happened. So let me tell you that I have been uncomfortable in recent years with the amount of money that Taylor Swift has taken off my children. All right. And they probably won't thank me for saying this. Happily, they'll probably never know. But when you look at the different income streams, you know how many albums there are, how many different versions of the same album every time she releases something new, and then getting tickets for the concerts. And I just feel that, and the merch, God save us from the merch, that it would be nice to see a little bit more Paul Heaton out there. Do you know who Paul Heaton is? Paul Heaton is probably the mothership or whatever the opposite pole is to what Oasis did this weekend. So Paul Heaton is the lead singer of the Beautiful South, formerly of the House Martins. Beautiful House is quite a good name for a band. It's probably a House Martins Beautiful South tribute act called the Beautiful House Martin. I digress. I think he certainly used to, and I presume he still does. He tries to keep the price of his tickets down to, I think, 35 quid. And I've seen him quoted somewhere as saying, I want everyone to be able to afford a pint if they come to the actual gig. And money's an interesting thing. So I did, on my tour, Archie wins, all right, he's texted to say, I don't like Paul Heaton. On my book tour last year, I won't tell you which one it was pretty obvious. There was one event that was overpriced. It sold out, so you can see why they charged what they charged. But on one event last year, just to make it very slightly personal, there was one event that I felt was overpriced. I felt can I say this without sounding ungrateful, but I can't believe anyone paid those prices for the opportunity to see me talk about my book, which you can get for free on the radio, or at the time you could get for free on the radio every day. Yeah, all right, 16 weeks in the top 10 and it's still there, but I don't like to boast. And it's interesting because you obviously get a cut of the money. Yeah, and the more money is raised on an evening like that, the more money you get. And I am never going to be anything like as rich as Taylor Swift or Liam and Noel Gallagher. Not by approximately $1 billion, not in approximately $1 billion years. But the tension there, the weird dynamic there is I don't think we should be charging that much, even though I get it. And that's why I've been a little bit uncomfortable with Taylor Swift in recent years. Because of the amount of money that she's taken, and we love her. And she is unique, and she's wonderful. And she's great live. But my goodness me, there's no sense ever that she's said to herself, I wonder if I could keep these prices down a bit, or maybe give them something for free, or make it am I sounding like a communist again? I just, you know what I mean? It's not mad. Like Paul Heaton saying, can we just put a cap on the ticket? So if I go on tour next year, I am going to put a cap on the ticket prices. I had a conversation with my publisher about this last week because I want people to come who can't afford the prices that we charged last year. Yeah, most of the tour was fine, but there was one event where the prices were too high and it meant that people couldn't come. Anyway, that is the closest I'm ever going to come to putting myself on the same podium as Taylor Swift and Oasis. It means I just worry. Look, all right, you can hate me for this. I worry about the people that can't afford it. All right, I worry about the families who can't have those moments that I've had with my daughters at a Taylor Swift concert, and I don't know what they're supposed to do. And she has fixed prices, doesn't she? She only has solid prices. They don't rise according to. So that's the bit I don't get about what happened this weekend with Oasis. Surge pricing, dynamic pricing, auction almost pricing, whatever you want to call it. And it is Ticketmaster that has come in for a right old kicking because, I can't quite believe these words. The prices went up. The tickets shot up in value from £148 to £355 while people were queuing up to buy them. Is that right? I mean, that is just what happened. You're queuing up to buy a ticket for £148, and in the unlikely event that you get to the front of the queue, it now costs £355. So Mrs. O'Brien and I had a little conversation about what we were and were not prepared to pay. There's a reason why I wanted to go to this concert, and it's because it truly spans the generations, the appeal of Oasis. We talked about this last week because of Spotify and streaming, and also because of Liam Gallagher's tireless festival schedule. Every decade since Oasis's heyday has developed a relationship with Oasis. So my children are in their teens. My colleagues are in their 20s. Some of them are desperately excited to have secured tickets. Some of them are gutted not to. The gentleman to whom I was talking earlier, when I questioned whether or not he felt his emotional relationship with the band had been compromised by this experience, and everybody on the news desk started laughing at me, he has spent hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pounds on tickets that when he started queuing up for them cost, well, less than half of what he ended up paying. And I think that's rank. I really think, I won't be saying that word again on the radio, I really think that's absolutely rotten. Don't you? Or am I? And that's why I said we're going to have a conversation about capitalism. Shortly after I said I was going to try not to sound pompous during a conversation that was definitely not going to be about the way that Oasis had compromised their relationship with their fans by scalping them for so much money. And the big story that I read at the weekend was how everywhere on social media it was saying, do not resell tickets at a higher price. If you resell tickets at a higher price, those tickets will be cancelled. Do not resell tickets at a... And then the people telling us not to resell tickets at a higher price were putting up the prices of the tickets while we were queuing up to buy them. So all of this has combined to really compromise my emotional relationship with it. No, I'm joking. All of this made me realise this morning when I was thinking, are we going to talk about this or are we not going to talk about this? They've spoilt it for me. They've spoilt it for me. Now, perhaps it's unfair to feel that Liam and Noel have spoilt it for me. They have knocked some of the gloss off my admiration of or affection for Oasis. And I am not particularly fussed that we didn't get tickets. If Aha go on tour next year, then everything's golden. But I'm not I felt it was outrageous what they did on two fronts. Front number one, it was such a palaver. There must have been a better way for doing it. The system was crashed a couple of times. So I'm in Kidderminster. I went to see my mum. I'm in Kidderminster, and I must say hello to Dave, who came over to say hello in the little Italian restaurant in Kidderminster on Friday night and made my mum loves it when things like that happen. So thank you, Dave. It was lovely to see you. Thank you for the kind words. I'm in Kidderminster on Saturday morning. Mrs. O'Brien is in London. We've got one daughter online trying to get tickets. Her mum's online trying to get tickets. She's messaging me to say, can you get online and try to get tickets? And I'm just like, no, I pretended that the Wi-Fi wasn't good enough in my mum's house. But I'm not. That's three members of the family. And I'm getting messages saying I'm 157,000th in the queue. And oh no, and then it's just cut off again. And that was part of but when I started reading about the way that the prices had gone up, something quite strange happened. Do you know what happened? I wasn't that fussed about getting tickets. I'm not paying 300 of that. There'd be very little change out of 1,500 quid by the time you've had a bucket of popcorn. And how many people are going to be spending money that they can't really afford or going to be completely priced? How many people got to the front of the queue? This is the thing that really gets me. Having invested, this is what it feels wrong that you had to do both things. That's why I'm tying them together. The rigmarole, that's a great word. We must say that more. The rigmarole plus the price inflation meant, I believe, that when you get to the front of the queue, because it's been such a... Can I say that word on the radio? Rhymes with bag. Shh. Can I say that? No? All right. Because it's been such a fuss to get there, you see the price has more than doubled, and you think, I must be able to say that. Can I say that? Yeah. Yeah. Because I don't think any other word works in this sentence. To get to the front of the queue, that when you get there and they've put the prices up by more than double, you actually think, well, blow this for a game of soldiers, I'm bloody buying them. And then you think, why, I've just spent 355 quid on tickets that should have cost me £148. So I can't do many. You see, Jas says, I spent 6 hours in the queue, saw the prices and closed the tab. How many people didn't close the tab but now wish they had? And you're not allowed to resell your ticket. Oh, you are. You can resell them for face value, right? You can put, okay. I can't do phone-ins every day, or even every week, and probably not even every month, where I say, am I just sounding very old? But I can do them occasionally. I'm not, am I? This is really bad. The combination of the rigmarole, or the shag, element of it, and the fact that the prices were going up. Someone's just told me that you wouldn't be allowed to do that in the EU. In which case, I mean, goodness me, as if there were any more need for proof that Brexit was a stupid idea. Imagine if it does turn out that that's correct and you're not allowed to do this in there. No, I'm not going to change the way I say rigmarole. I like saying rigmarole. Is it spelt rigmarole or rig? I don't know. All right, I'll check that then during the break. Andrew says, James, are you actually trying to sell your tickets? I can't figure it out. No, here's what I'm asking. Is it stupid to hold Noel and Liam Gallagher personally responsible for the great sense of betrayal and disappointment you have over the way that the sale of tickets for their reunion concerts was handled? Or is it just capitalism in action? Is it just ticketmastering? Because I mean, look, I can't imagine when I put the music on, I'm going to feel differently about it. But I was almost relieved when we failed to get tickets, having seen reports of how much they'd gone up by. How is it morally justifiable to put the prices of tickets up while people are in the queue? To which you answer by saying, well, no one was forced to pay for them. And that's where I say I can't quite work out what it is that I find so offensive about this. But I do. Do you? 0345 6060 973. So do you find it as offensive as I do? Can you make a better job than I have of putting into words why we find it so offensive? Or, of course, can you explain to me why it's not offensive at all and everyone should do it? You can imagine if you're in the queue for an ice cream. And it says on the side of the van. So my mate Enzo, right, who's an ice cream man outside the garden centre in Brentford, come rain or shine, or obviously more likely shine, being an ice cream man and everything. So he's got his prices on the side of his van. The queue sometimes is snaking all the way back to Chiswick. There's massive queues for the ice cream on a nice hot bank holiday. Imagine if you start queuing up for a strawberry mivvy that'll set you back £2.50, and by the time you get to the front of the queue, Enzo's charging you £5. He wouldn't do that in a million years. So why are Ticketmaster allowed to do it? Why are you allowed to put the prices up while you're actually in the queue? Or am I just sounding like a weird old geezer? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Keith's done a very funny joke, which I said to him it won't work on the radio, so you need to get a screen grab and put it up on Twitter. So James cleverly is currently launching his leadership campaign for the Conservative leadership, I think. And Grant Shapps is introducing him, which means Grant Shapps is currently standing behind a podium that says cleverly for leader. And Keith said, I think he's changed his name again. That's a really good joke. Credit where credit is due. So I shall retweet Keith later, and you can enjoy that joke in the knowledge that you were there when it was actually conceived. You were there at the moment of conception of that joke. My apologies for somehow having spent 52 and a half years mispronouncing rigmarole. Well, I can't imagine I said it when I was 2. But it's rigmarole. I don't know where I got rigmarole from. It's rigmarole. I like this from John. Precisely 1 minute before you said rigmarole, James, I'd been listening to an Ipswich Town podcast my son had recorded and complimented him on the use of the same word. It is an underused word. Should we start a rigmarole appreciation society? It's a wonderful word. We shall start injecting it into all sorts of context if we can. And a little shout out while we're respecting comedy. A little shout out to Ken on Ladbroke Grove, who's got in touch to say, hi James, I like Oasis and cheese. Regards, Ken, Ladbroke Grove. Beth's in Watford. Beth, what's going on?
Hi James, good afternoon.
Hello Beth. How do we feel about this?
Well, I don't like this surge in pricing. It is price gouging. I spent 10 hours trying to get tickets. I didn't get any. My rage is focused at Ticketmaster at the moment. Okay. I'm just really angry.
Not Liam and Noel.
Not at the moment.
No.
I've waited 15 years for them to reunite. So even if they have been the ones that said, yeah, let's rinse them a bit more, I will pay the money. I will pay the money. I want to see them. But it is,
what would you have gone up to?
About 500 mark.
Would you really?
Yeah, really.
Well, I'm surprised they didn't do that then. I'm surprised they didn't actually start doing is it a Dutch auction or is that something else? So they didn't start saying, you press this button if you're prepared to pay for... I've just given Ticketmaster an idea, haven't I?
I know, but I mean, now they've heard it, they'll probably do it now. They're like, let's add a few more days.
Press this button if you want to pay 500, and once everyone is prepared to pay 500 has bought, it'd be like it's like a game show where you're gambling on what other people are going to do. So I'm not going to pay 500 because there won't be enough people to pay 500. They're not going to sell out 17 Stadium with people like Beth who are going to pay 500 a ticket. So you go and buy yours. I'll wait till it comes down to 400, and on and on and on it goes. So what are you going to do? I think you'll be all right. I think that some people who got to the front of the queue after 10 hours ended up paying through the nose for tickets that they want but don't want that much but have paid for anyway. I think you'll be able to scoop them up nearer the time.
Yeah, that's kind of my plan now. I think I'll wait and see what happens, and potentially look at the resale.
And you're blaming them entirely. So let me read you were you listening to the first hour of the programme today, Beth?
Unfortunately not.
Why not?
I was at home with my son messing around.
Well, and you can't have the radio on in the background while you're at home with your son messing around? There's some rule about that, is there, somehow? Unbelievable.
I'm having the PlayStation. I know.
I don't do this for my own amusement, you know. But anyway, we're having a conversation in the first hour about a Labour MP who has been letting out properties in a right old state. He's got into all sorts of bother and he's blamed it on the letting agent. He said, I had no idea how terrible things were. I have fired my letting agent and I will be making amends immediately. Hayden has texted to say Noel and Liam are responsible for the ticket price hikes in the same way that Jas Athwal is responsible for the state of his properties. I think he's got a point. I don't think they can be let off the hook completely for this.
I agree with that. I don't think they can be let off the hook either. I think we all know the cynical reason behind why they're doing this. Do they know that it makes them a lot of money?
Makes them a lot of money, keeps them in the news. Everybody's delighted. People like you are prepared to forgive, and people who got to the front of the queue and thought they can't afford it, they just wasted 10 hours of their life for no reason whatsoever. But it leaves a very sour taste in my mouth. And I think it would have been even more sour if I had got tickets, if I'd got caught up in the kind of tulip fever of it and paid through the nose for tickets that I didn't think were worth that much. I'm glad I got Paul Heaton right. Stephen Cornwall's been in touch. Robert Smith and Tim Burgess also pursue similar tactics. Robert Smith, of course, lead singer of The Cure. Tim Burgess, lead singer of The Charlatans. All fantastic bands. And the idea that you try and keep things affordable for the people that wouldn't otherwise be able to afford it. Keaton's in Hammersmith. Keaton, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Hello, just want to say, love the show. I'm listening for absolutely years in my dad's car and everything, so I'm really glad I can call in today.
Oh, how lovely. Thank you.
I'm a lifelong Oasis fan. I'm 26, so to give you some context, last time I saw him, I was 11. And that was at Wembley on the last tour. I've seen everything Liam Gallagher's done since, from BDI to, you know, his own solo act, seen the High Flying Birds.
Yes.
And you can guarantee...
That's Noel's act, the High Flying Birds.
That is indeed. And my thing has been, you know, Noel needed Liam, Liam needed Noel. That was all how it's been. And I've been waiting for this for so long.
Yeah.
And to be honest, you know, I'm really excited about the opportunity to be there. I was on there for the pre-ballot, didn't get anything back for that. I was back there on 9 o'clock on Saturday morning, waited for hours and hours and hours. And then obviously by the time you get there in the queue, to then see the price has gone up to about 350 quid for what should have been 150.
That's right. Yeah.
You know, I have the money, but it's a principle thing.
Yeah,
you know, I could have paid that 350 quid and gone without a few things from next month.
You could have just rolled with it.
Exactly, but for me, surge pricing should be something that is when things are really near to the event. You know, if there was something resold for an event in a year's time, I can't see how, you know, they wouldn't be able to...
Do you feel let down personally?
I do in a way, and that's only because, you know, Oasis are genuinely my favourite band of all time. And, you know, I have connections to them. I'm a Manchester City fan as well, which is part of the reason how I got into them.
Gosh.
And I was there in the days, you know, when we were in the probably last time they were playing.
I know that they all started laughing at me because of the way I phrased the question about feeling that your relationship has been emotionally compromised. But the people that you love, the stars that you love, you feel you know, right? You feel you have a personal relationship with them.
But especially in the case of Oasis, when, you know, they've made their millions off of classing themselves as a working class band. You know, and when they've come out of Manchester and told this story, all their songs are about that as well. To then I mean, look, we know they're getting back together for money. It's not because of the love for each other or the band.
No, no, that's
so you
for
have
sure.
to sort of put that to one side.
So do you think next time you pop Definitely Maybe on it, is it actually going to hit your ears differently?
I have to admit, it somewhat has already.
Yeah,
you know,
I'm like you, Keaton. I'm a bit like you, actually. It might change, because I thought I was going to go off the Smiths forever when Morrissey went bonkers. But I can listen to their music again now and still love it. But this has changed a bit.
But there's something that I have to, you know, bear in mind with it. I mean, look, the music's fantastic and nothing will ever change with that. But you're affiliation with the band, the way you feel about them can change based on these things. And I think it just sets a really, really poor precedent for any other band now who goes, look, we're going to get back together and we'll charge 600 quid. And, that seems to be a normal thing. I was even speaking to someone at work the other day who said, look, I'm happy to pay 500 quid for this because he's a really big Beyonce fan and he paid £800 to go and see Beyonce. And, he thinks that this is value in comparison to that. But that's because of the really, really bad state that the musical industry is.
Yeah, I get that.
And you can't undercharge. If someone else is charging this much, why wouldn't they charge that much?
Well, that's capitalism. That's capitalism. So, what exactly are you complaining about? I'm complaining about the fact you put the price on the door and then you pay it if you're prepared to go through the door. What you don't do is queue up for 10 hours to get to the door and see that the price has doubled or tripled in order to go through it.
Well, this is the thing. And back in the day, you'd have queued at a ticket office, whether that's a football match, a gig, or whatever. Those people who wanted to get it would have
got in. And then I tell you what,
the price would have been the same if they were at the back of the line.
Don't go away, Keaton. Rather gratifyingly, number of people who actually got it completely. My reference to tulip fever is once again a mark of the literary calibre of the listeners to this programme. Is your name Keaton, as in Michael?
Well, it's spelled the same, but it's named after Buster Keaton. My dad.
I thought it might be. I just thought we might have misheard it, and it might actually be Keating, because I've got on my.
No, I get that all the time. Everyone goes Boyzone.
Well, guess who's on line one? Guess who's on line one?
Keating.
Ronan. Ronan's in Glasgow. Keith spotted. You're working very hard today, Keith. That's one joke and one good spot. Take the rest of the week off. We'll talk to Ronan after Amelia Cox brings us the latest headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:33 is the time. Fans look back in anger after ticket website doubles prices. I can't resist that headline. It's extraordinary, just as it's equally obvious to say that you should just roll with it. But I don't think we are going a bit mad or sounding very old. There's something really ugly about the idea of queuing up for hours and hours and hours for something, only to discover that it's doubled in price when you get to the front of the queue. I say if it's morally outrageous, you go, oh, it's just concert tickets. But I genuinely feel it's much bigger than that. What do you think? 0345 606 0973. Ronan is in Glasgow. Ronan, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, mate.
Lovely to talk to you. I did manage to get tickets, and I did manage to get them at face value.
Right. Well done. How long did that take? How long were you waiting for?
About 3 hours, but I managed to get them on a different website that wasn't Ticketmaster, basically.
Okay. Well done.
Yeah. But yeah, I've always kind of hated Ticketmaster just because of the way they operate and the fact that they're in cahoots with a lot of these websites that touts you to resale tickets.
Well, I don't think we can let that go unremarked. I don't know that that's true, but
okay.
So I'm sure that they would deny any of that kind of conduct or behaviour. But talk to me about how the gap, what the correct phrase is, the dynamic pricing or the absolutely obscene inflation has made you feel, because you should really be celebrating, and the more other people ended up having to pay for them, the better the business you've done becomes.
Yeah, but like getting tickets, and then I didn't know that the dynamic pricing was sanctioned by the band. I thought that was something that Ticketmaster did themselves, but when I heard that was how it operated, it kind of muddied the whole thing for me, to be honest.
It's a funny one, isn't it? I mean, could they say no? I think of course they could say no.
No, I think they can. Yeah, they can say no. Yeah.
Do you buy a lot of concert tickets?
I used to, not as much as I used to.
But we know how often this happens, because I bought Taylor Swift tickets. It didn't happen with Taylor Swift tickets, and they're the most sought after of the last few years, aren't they?
Yeah. This is the first time it's happened to me. I think it's relatively new, but this whole dynamic pricing thing it's the new evil. In America, there's certain fast food restaurants that are starting to do it now as well on some of their products, and supermarkets are starting to do it in America as well.
How do you do it in a fast food restaurant?
So I don't know. Maybe you go in and.
I can see how you might do it on delivery. You might do it on delivery at times of huge demand, but I can't see how you do it in an actual restaurant.
Well, I don't know how it works, but that's...
No, I think it'd be delivery, I reckon. I reckon you've got your wires crossed there a bit, don't you?
Possibly.
Yeah, it'll be delivery. Because if you can do it on Uber when you're getting in the car as a passenger, then you can do it on Uber Eats, presumably, when you want to have a pizza delivered in the middle of the World Cup final or something like that. You see what I mean?
Yeah. I get what you mean, yeah. But yeah, just the whole thing has kind of severed it for me, to be honest.
You're still going to go, though, are you? Because if you're not, I'll take them off your hands.
I'm probably still going to go, yeah.
Who are you going with? I might be free that night.
My brothers and my partner.
Oh, great. 12:36. Yeah. Thank you, Ronan. Lovely stuff. What is it? Are there words? What is the precedent for this? Because even with the food delivery, there's more of that has a more acceptable feel to it. If there's a finite number of bikes delivering food and everybody wants some food, therefore you can say, all right, I'll charge you double. And you'll go, yeah, is that any different? There's a finite number of tickets. Everybody wants a ticket. So you can say, all right, I'll charge you double. I don't know. It just feels wrong. Laura's in Rye. Laura, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Yeah, I just wanted to tell you my son's little story. So when the tickets were announced last week, or Oasis getting back together, he was utterly delirious. He was so excited. Aww. And so we had a little plan, a family plan on Saturday morning. We were all up at 6, and his sister lives in Panama. She got up in the middle of the night. His brother-in-law's in Colombia. We literally had everybody.
Blimey.
Nothing at all. So we had a bit of a hard stop because at 3 o'clock we were going to watch Dulwich Hamlet play Leatherhead.
Oh, yes.
So we knew that when we walked into the stadium, with the signal isn't great. So go in, and no one had any luck. We were messaging on the WhatsApp, this is going to be hopeless. And we get into the ground and go to the bar to get our beers. And just as we get up to to get served at the bar, he goes, "Mum, I'm in."
Wow.
And everybody in the bar was like, yes. So everyone was obviously doing exactly the same thing.
Oh, we like that.
And I said, "How much?" And he was like, "Oh, Mum, £370.
Shush.
So he doesn't earn great money at all. Him and his girlfriend have quite high rents in London, and so he was deliberating. I could see him almost going for it, and I thought, I'm not going to say anything because this is his dream. He's waited for this, and I said, we know that Nanny and my sister Kate will all give you money for your birthday, so you can put it towards it. And the little girl who was serving us behind the bar, our beers, she said, it's really a lot of money, isn't it? She said, do you think you can afford, won't you regret it after? She said, because I've just given up. I'm not paying it as much as I love them. And I said, what's John thinking? And then it was like a light. He was like, no, I'm not paying it.
I don't have to pay it. I don't have to pay it.
Why should
£370. How many was he going to get?
Just for him and his girlfriend.
So
really.
740. What can you do with £740? Could buy an engagement ring.
Yeah, he could buy a flight to go and see Beth, his sister in Panama. And it was just lovely because I couldn't say it because I know it would have been like a bit of a down of his mum to say it, and I obviously wanted him to go, and we'd all would have helped him put in a little bit each. But I was really glad. I know it is, isn't it? And so he's a little ticketless bloke at the moment, but we're hoping.
Is he kicking himself? Is he wishing he'd done it now that the dust has settled, or he's happy with his decision?
We had a lovely football match, had a couple of beers, and it was it's always lovely there. And it was such a lovely day.
Is it the Isthmian? Is the Isthmian League? Is it?
A non-league, I think it is.
Yeah, but I think it's called the ISTHMIAN League. It's below even Kidderminster Harriers.
Yes.
It's the 7th tier of English football. I think it comes below the National League North, the National League South, and then it's your lot. It's the Isthmian League. So if you play your cards right, you could get into the National League South next season.
It was just a lovely atmosphere.
Imagine if they started charging £370 for a ticket to Dulwich Hamlet. That would be a turn up for the books, wouldn't it? It's a terrible.
Dom's was £13 and mine was only £5.
There you go. I bet you have more fun at a Dulwich Hamlet game than you would at an Oasis concert. I mean, again, thank you, Laura. What a lovely call. And I'm happy for your boy making the decision that he made, but he should have been able to get the tickets for what they were charging. Anthony points out the airlines have been doing it forever, haven't they? And how many times do you find yourself on a plane where you've paid exactly the same amount of money as everybody else on the plane? So are we being a bit naive? Are we expecting a higher standard from rock stars than we do from food delivery companies and airlines? I don't know. Michael's in Addleston. Michael, what would you like to say?
I think very much to touch on the point that you've just made, it's kind of become a bit of a common fact of life now, isn't it? We pay based on demand. And
where else do we do it? I'm not arguing with you. I just need you to remind me, where else do we do it?
Yeah, so Uber, both the delivery services and the travel services, we pay based on demand there. We pay based on demand for holidays. When it comes around to kids' school holidays, we pay 2-3 times the price for a holiday.
Oh yeah.
So why should Oasis not be able to make a bit of extra money as well? And to touch on your point earlier, Taylor Swift did do it. Taylor Swift turned dynamic pricing on, and she made the choice to enable that.
No, that's not true. That is the opposite.
No, it is. There was a huge uproar about it. I think for the later ticket sales they did, but the first batch of Taylor Swift tickets had dynamic pricing turned on. And similarly...
Everyone else is telling me the opposite, but...
There was dynamic pricing for Taylor Swift because I nearly got stung by it. And similarly, Blink-182 did dynamic pricing for their tour in the UK for the first leg sort of late last year. So it's just kind of common nowadays. And ultimately, like if these artists, someone like Oasis, they're getting back together.
I think in America maybe she did it, but she didn't do it here.
Potentially then, but I remember.
So you didn't nearly get stung by it. I'm not being snarky. It's important these things because it's a legal matter. So Reddit has got a whole thread on how it didn't happen. Taylor Swift did not turn on dynamic pricing, although the original price was higher than some of the figures that Oasis ended up with as a result of dynamic pricing. So you could argue that she didn't need to.
Maybe it was some of the hospitality packages or something.
Maybe she didn't need to do it. So you're saying that's just the way of the world now. Get over it. Roll with it.
I just think it's the way things. Yeah, roll with it. I just think that's the way things are nowadays. I think more and more artists are going to do it.
And then you stand out if you don't. So your Paul Heatons and your Robert Smiths and your Tim Burgesses, you stand out if you don't do it. You push back against the trend of it, and then you actually are being whatever the correct word is to describe the opposite of greedy. You're saying I will have less at the end of this concert in my bank account, but I will have more somewhere else. I will have more in a place that I care more about, and that doesn't make you better or worse than the person who cares more about their bank account. So the feeling of goodwill that you get, or the feeling of virtue that you get from doing something nice or generous, is also a reward for people who are built that way, in the way that the money is a reward for people who are built in that way. I don't know. Thank you, Michael. I just sort of think £740 when you're struggling to meet your rent is extraordinary. But I mean, when's the last time you paid for a flight that wasn't priced according to demand and timing? Tony's in Whitstable in Kent. Tony, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi James. I don't want to repeat a lot of what's been said, but I'd like to make 3 or 4 points.
Sorry, can you be more specific? Would you like to make 3 or 4 points?
3.
So carry on.
Firstly, the blame for this is firmly at the management of Oasis, which I assume involves Noel and Liam.
Yeah, you'd think
They have to turn dynamic pricing on. Secondly, my son sat for 10 hours with 4 or 5 family accounts open. We got tickets at 5:30 at £355, which, like the other lady, he simply couldn't afford.
Yeah.
And therefore, instead of buying them and reselling them at stupid money, because we would never do that, we had to let them go.
And I think you'd get into trouble if you tried. So if he'd known after 5 hours that it was going to be £355, he'd have got 5 hours of his life back.
That's the third point I was going to make. If they want to make X amount of money, just tell us the price point is 200, 250, 300. Don't gouge us like the touts do about the more you're scrabbling around the virtual forum screaming, give me a ticket. Okay, I'll give you a ticket, but it's going to cost you twice what I gave the guy 5 hours ago.
Yeah.
It's a betrayal of their fans.
I think it is. I don't use that word lightly either. Betrayal is a good word. It's a principled betrayal.
And I want to push back a little bit to the last caller.
Yes.
This is a really finite number of tickets. It's a small volume. If you talk about holidays, flights, you know that there is a yield management algorithm in all of those.
Yeah.
But although finite, is a huge volume, and you have more choice. We have no choice here. We have 17 shows, I think it is, and that's it. So it's
no choice except not to go. I mean, of course, I understand what you're saying. So will it have changed your son's attitude, do you think, to the
I think
band?
He's in his 20s. I think he just understands that society is a self-serving thing in business. I went to my first concert in 1973.
Who was it?
it was Focus, believe it or not, the Rainbow in London.
Fantastic.
And I have never had this experience.
No, and well, that's the problem, isn't it? As Michael pointed out, we probably have to get used to it. It's probably going to be the way forward. Because when push comes to shove, who says no to money? That's the real nub of it. Here's some money. Would you like it? Tony, I'll just do an experiment on you. Would you like some money?
Yeah.
You see?
Just be honest about the amount of money you want.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? That's it. But maybe you don't realise how. So you get a phone call on 11 o'clock on Saturday morning, you answer the phone and go, yeah, all right, what do you want? They say, it's gone bonkers on the Ticketmaster. I reckon we could charge 370 quid a ticket. Are you in or are you out? Yeah, nice one, mate. I'm in. So I'm not suggesting for a minute that happened, but at some point we are asking people to say, no, please stop giving me money. And that might be unrealistic.
I think it's just an individual choice. And in this case, it clearly is unrealistic.
Yeah, well, except it's not. It's unrealistic for us and for Sue's son, but for the people who've paid the money, and for, was it Beth, who would have paid 500 quid a ticket but didn't get any anyway? So what an almighty to take all that great, wonderful swell of goodwill and excitement that was sweeping through the nation on Thursday and Friday last week, and then to turn it into this. I presume, I hope that money keeps them warm at night, but I presume that they're going to be a little bit unhappy about the PR element of what has unfolded this weekend, but maybe not. Maybe the money cancels everything out. 12:47. David asked what accent that was that was pure Burnage, mate. Seriously.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:51 is the time. Interesting to see how that one shakes down, won't it? Quite a lot of conflicting accounts on it, actually. One suggestion that the Ticketmaster get all the money from the dynamic pricing and Oasis only get the share that they would have got from the originally agreed prices. But we turn our attention next to important matters. I have established at some point in the not-too-distant past that the levels of excitement surrounding the unfolding Conservative Party leadership contest are quite staggeringly low. So I have charged LBC's political editor, Natasha Clark, and LBC's political correspondent, Aggie Chambre, with ramping up excitement levels today. One of them has been attending Kemi Badenoch's launch. One of them has been attending James Cleverly's launch. And by 1 o'clock today, Natasha and Aggie will have combined forces, like Crossing the Streams this in Ghostbusters, to introduce an explosion of political excitement. That will begin imminently. But first, let's have a listen to what both candidates have had to say today while launching their respective leadership campaigns. Here's Kemi Badenoch.
Too often, politicians pretend that we can have everything. So they make promises they cannot keep. They say you can spend more on everything and still have lower taxes. They say that there are huge efficiencies to be had in government without identifying them. They propose huge changes without making plans. Engineers accept reality. Engineers are honest. Engineers get stuff done. I am an engineer.
Anyone excited yet? Keith? Here's James Cleverly.
People don't vote for divided parties. They don't trust divided parties. They don't even listen to divided parties. So we must unite if we want the British people to listen to us again. So when they are fed up, as they inevitably will be, with Starmer's inept, high taxing, red tape loving, big state, crony-filled government, they will look to us again to be the change that they want to see in this country.
That was James Cleverly. So, Natasha Clark, LBC's political editor, make Kemi Badenoch exciting.
Well, James, I'd just like to start by correcting your pronunciation of my friend Miss Badenoch's name.
But doesn't it really annoy her?
Doesn't it really very annoy upsets her?
Yes,
when people get it wrong. So
Kemi Badenoch it is then.
That might be your aim for today. But look, I think what Kemi Badenoch is trying to suggest today with her bold, ambitious leadership launch is that it's time for something different. Labour is not going to deliver on any of the problems that this government has to offer. They have no ideas. They're clueless. They're irresponsible, dishonest.
How does she know? They've only been there for
7 weeks. What have they done in 7 weeks, James?
Just before anyone starts bombarding Natasha or Aggie with text, they are in the role of cheerleader today. I have appointed them to that role. This is not a position that they have arrived at organically.
Good Good to have that clarification.
Good to clarify. So go on, tell me what my listeners should be getting excited about.
But look, Kemi's pitch, I think, today is that she wants to be something different. She wants to be bold. She doesn't want to do the same old business as usual. She thinks that Labour are going to fail on their promises to deliver change for the country, and that she, in her role, if she gets elected as Tory leader, wants to be that person, to be ready with the answers that she says are going to be there when Labour fail. She wants to provide new thinking, new ideas, new politics. She's not going to come up with a list of policy ideas off the hoof. She says today that she is an engineer and she wants to fix the country.
Is she an actual engineer?
She does have I think a degree in some form of engineering. I forget which one she does, but yes, she does have experience in this matter.
Has she ever worked as an engineer?
It's a great question, James, and I'm sure sources close to Kemi Badenoch would say that of course she has.
She worked in IT, I think.
I think you might be right.
So this is where I alienate the engineering department again, like I did when the switchboard went. So she says engineer. I think Isambard Kingdom Brunel, but she actually means IT.
Yes, and I think what her message...
Which is great. We love IT. IT, without IT, we're all nothing. But it's not building bridges or trains, is it?
But her message is, look, I don't have all the answers, I don't have all the solutions, but I know where to find them and I know where to get to them, and I know that it's not just about promising these easy answers, about promising these sound bites like politicians have done for the last 25 years. I'm actually going to get to grips with the actual job at hand, which is to try and fix some of these deep-rooted answers rather than some of the other candidates who are just going to promise you the earth.
Okay. She also worked as a associate director, a private wealth manager at Coutts, and as a digital editor on the Spectator website. Aggie Chambre, James Cleverly, make him sing.
Well, I'd just like to say the good news is James Cleverly does have ideas as well as policies. So Kemi Badenoch may say, okay, well, I don't have the answers. Good news, James Cleverly does. He just launched in a very glitzy location in central London.
Grant Shapps as warm-up man.
Grant Shapps as warm-up.
What's not to like?
I mean, I have to
say...
Who
did Kemi Badenoch have as warm-up man or woman?
She had Claire Coutinho and Lord Maud.
Lord Maud?
Exactly.
Never heard of him. Oh, Francis Maud.
Yeah.
They're all lords now. Lord Maud. That's a great name, actually. Lord Maud. Grant Shapps, Lord Maud, Grant Shapps. Carry on. What else did he...
Right, so the big policies that he announced today is, number one, he's going to scrap stamp duty. Number two, he's going to raise defence spending to 3% of GDP as soon
pay for that?
as possible. Well, the thing is, Kemi or Natasha, whoever you are now, the welfare bill is ballooning. The NHS spending is absolutely ballooning. So we just need to get those things under control. And, you can't afford to not spend 3% of GDP on defence. That's the problem. And thirdly, he's going to resurrect the Rwanda scheme. Now, that's going to be difficult.
He used a very rude word to describe it, reportedly.
That was going to be
not long ago.
He obviously hasn't denied saying that. That was...
because he can't.
Yes, but however, having conversations like this makes it more difficult to resurrect the Rwanda scheme. He thinks we're going to have to fix that relationship before he's actually able to resurrect it. So it's actually not helpful for you guys to talk about that.
I thought that a party that's arguing with each other doesn't get elected.
It doesn't, no, absolutely.
So why are you arguing with each other?
Because you made us.
But I think that's a really good point.
It's all down to personal responsibility, is what I think.
It's just important to talk about what you have done. For example, James has met hundreds of Tory activists across the country, hasn't been on holiday, he's been to dozens of associations, and, other candidates have been on holiday. But I do say that, knowing that there are yellow cards if candidates are rude about each other or do personal jibes. So I think it's important
that wasn't a personal jibe
about
my holiday, which I promised my children that I would take them on holiday this summer, and I decided to honour that promise because I do think that the next leader of the Conservative Party should be an honourable politician.
We've hit upon a problem, haven't we? In that it's only going to get interesting for the public if it gets quite febrile and vicious, and they all probably recognise. So how vicious, Aggie first, how vicious do you think it's going to get? Are they going to start biting real chunks out of each other if it's closer than expected?
I think so. I think probably they've got a few weeks. I think until when it gets down to the final four, I imagine at conference it might get pretty vicious.
Okay, let's hope so. And who, in the event of it getting pretty vicious, Natasha Clark, who do you think is best equipped?
Well, we're already seeing it. We're already seeing teams take chunks out of each other. We're already seeing Team Kemi take chunks out of each other. There was a briefing last week where, like I say, they were hitting back at those holiday accusations, saying, no one is going to begrudge the next leader of the Conservative Party to have a holiday. And yes, I think we will see that from Team Jenrick. I'm sure he will be keen to hit back at those accusations
and in a
too.
Sentence, for people listening to this who say, I just don't care. Why should they, Aggie?
Because in 5 years, these could be the people fighting to be the next Prime Minister.
Well, then I'll start caring in 4.5 years.
We need a strong opposition now to hold the government's feet to the fire and all the things that they said they were going to do.
I still don't care. Do you care?
I always care.
Yeah, she always cares.
Yeah.
Sheila cares.
That was great fun, by the way.
Thank you.
We can carry on.
What
if
an
you like.
interesting device.
Yes, I know. I dream these things up in the hope of injecting some excitement into otherwise very dull.
I think we should do this every week.
Let's not get carried away, ladies.
I want to do the whole
Stop
show
it.
now.
It's the James O'Brien experience.
No, I'm going to take you further. I want to do my whole show as Liz Truss.
Oh, God save us all. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you'll also find all of LBC's shows to catch up on, as well as all of Global's live radio stations. So download the Global Player for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, Tom Swarbrick's back from his holidays, but now it's Sheila Fogarty.
James O'Brien on LBC.